I used to work as a groundskeeper at Colonial Park Cemetery in Savannah. If you've ever been there, you know it's not one of those quiet, forgotten cemeteries tucked in the woods. It's right in the middle of the old city, surrounded by cobblestone streets, flickering gas lamps, and the kind of humidity that makes even the air feel haunted. I started in 2018, mostly doing cleanup work, raking, trimming, helping with guided night tours when the city allowed them. I wasn't much of a believer in ghost stories, but Savannah has a way of getting under your skin. There were 3 of us who worked the late shift that summer. Me, a guy named Dennis who'd been there over 10 years, and a new hire named Rena. We handled maintenance during the hours when tourists weren't around. It wasn't uncommon to hear things at night. Distant voices from River Street, passing cars, or the occasional drunk ghost tour guide shouting about the restless souls of Savannah. You got used to the noise, you had to. Otherwise, you'd never last more than a week. One Thursday night near the end of June, we were clearing branches after a storm. The air smelled like wet moss and salt. Dennis was fixing the latch on the main gate, and Rena and I were working near the back wall where some of the older family vaults stood. These weren't simple gravestones. They were big stone-sealed crypts, maybe 6 feet high, with carved names worn almost smooth by 2 centuries of rain. That's when Rena stopped working. She tilted her head, listening. "Do you hear that?" she asked. At first, I didn't. The rain was still dripping from the trees, and the wind made the oak branches creak. But then, faint, almost like it was under the ground, I heard it too. A soft, muffled crying. It sounded like a woman, not wailing, just low, exhausted sobbing. We both froze. It was coming from one of the family vaults about 10 yards away. The plaque on the front said, Telfair 1843-1902. I remember because my flashlight beam hit the lettering, and the water running down the stone made it look like tears. Rena whispered, "Is someone inside?" It was ridiculous, of course. The crypts were sealed shut with stone slabs and mortar, no doors, no vents. Still, the sound was there. Steady, heartbreaking, human. I told her it was probably water dripping through a crack or maybe an echo from the street. But when Dennis came over, he heard it too. He pressed his ear to the wall and frowned. "That's not water," he said. "That's someone crying." We called our supervisor, thinking maybe a tourist had gotten stuck somewhere, but nobody answered. The crying kept going, faint but clear. It would rise a little, like whoever was inside was trying to catch their breath, then fade again. The 3 of us stood there, flashlights pointed at the vault, too nervous to speak. Finally, Dennis said, "Help me check the seals." We ran our hands along the stone edges, but the mortar was solid. No cracks, no openings. I even climbed up the side a little, trying to see if the roof had caved in, but it was perfectly intact. The crying didn't stop the whole time. Dennis went to get a crowbar from the shed, saying he wasn't leaving till we figured it out. I didn't like the idea of prying open a 150-year-old vault in the middle of the night, but when he came back, he was dead serious. He chipped away a bit of mortar around the bottom edge. As soon as he wedged the bar in, the crying stopped. Not faded. Stopped. Dead silence. The 3 of us just stood there. Rena whispered, "What if she heard us?" And then she laughed, the kind of nervous laugh you give when you're trying to convince yourself everything's fine. But even she didn't believe it. We decided to finish our shift near the front gate. None of us wanted to be back there alone. By morning, the story had spread to the day crew. A couple of the older guys said it wasn't the first time that vault had made noises. One of them, Rick, said he heard scratching years ago like fingernails on stone, but figured it was raccoons. He told us not to talk about it. Tourists loved the legends, but management didn't want ghost gossip tied to the cemetery's maintenance team. A week passed with nothing strange. We joked about the crying lady to keep things light. But then one night around 2 a.m., Dennis didn't show up for roll call. Rena and I assumed he was running late, but after an hour we went looking for him. His truck was parked near the south gate, door unlocked, keys still in the ignition. His flashlight was lying on the seat, still on. We followed the beam of light toward the path leading to the old vaults. It was quiet, too quiet, like the air itself was holding its breath. When we reached the Telfair crypt, the ground in front of it looked disturbed, like someone had been digging or scraping. The crying sound was back, louder this time, desperate, echoing from inside. Rena started to panic, saying Dennis must have gone in somehow, maybe through a hole under the vault. I told her that was impossible, but when I stepped closer, I saw fingerprints on the stone, wet, smudged prints like someone had been pressing against it from the inside. We called the police. They brought in the fire department and even a city historian to oversee the process. It took them half an hour to break the seal. The entire time the crying continued, soft, steady, like someone weeping behind a door. But the second they pried the stone free and light touched the inside, it stopped again. There was nothing inside except 4 caskets, all rotted and sunken from age. No signs of disturbance, no air pockets, nothing human that could make that sound. Dennis wasn't there. The police treated it as a missing person case. They searched the grounds, the nearby alleys, even the riverbank. They found his jacket hanging on a fence post about a mile away, dry despite the dew. His phone was in the pocket, turned off. No sign of him after that night. The city resealed the vault 2 days later. Rena quit the same week. I stayed a little longer, partly because I needed the job, partly because I couldn't stand not knowing what happened. For weeks, every time I walked past that crypt, I'd stop and listen. Some nights it was silent. Other nights I swore I could hear faint sobbing again. So soft I couldn't tell if it was real or just in my head. Then one evening, about 3 months after Dennis disappeared, I found a folded paper wedged under the latch of the tool shed. It was a cemetery work order, the kind we used to fill out for daily maintenance. The handwriting was Dennis's, no doubt about it. Next to job location, he'd written, Telfair Vault. Under notes, it said, she's still crying. I think she knows my name now. I left the job the next morning. I didn't tell anyone about the note. I still have it though. It's yellowed now, but the ink hasn't faded. Sometimes I take it out and read that last line, trying to convince myself there's a logical explanation. Maybe he faked it. Maybe it was all some kind of prank. But then I remember something the historian said the night they opened the vault. He'd been reviewing the family records while the firemen worked. The last person buried there was a woman, named Margaret Telfair, interred in 1902 after she supposedly died of melancholia and exhaustion. But the coroner's notes listed something else. Asphyxiation consistent with live burial. I've never gone back to Colonial Park since. But friends who work there now say that sometimes, after heavy rain, you can still hear a woman crying from somewhere deep among the old vaults. They say it always starts soft, like she's waking up. Then after a while it sounds like she's calling a name, and lately they say, it sounds a lot like Dennis. It always starts the same way. A thunderstorm rolls through town, tearing across the pines and the broken stone walls that divide the old cemetery on Hillcrest Road. The lightning flickers. The wind screams through the iron gate. And when it's all over, when the night quiets down to nothing but dripping leaves, someone always says they saw it again. The lantern. My name's Daniel Harlow, and I've worked at Hillcrest Memorial for almost 13 years. It's an old place, the kind that looks older than the town around it. Most of the stones date back to the mid-1800s, their names worn down to soft shadows. The ground swells like the earth underneath still moves sometimes, and there are places where the headstones lean in toward each other, like they're whispering. It's not a big operation, just me and Earl, the owner's cousin, who works mornings, and I cover the nights, locking the gates, fixing what vandals break, keeping the generators from dying in the storms. We don't get many visitors after dark, but Hillcrest sits close to a 2-lane road between Bangor and the coast, so kids sometimes sneak in to drink or take pictures. The first time I heard about the lantern, I thought it was one of those stories every small town keeps alive to scare outsiders. Earl told me one morning while we were patching a fence. You'll see it sooner or later, he said, half smiling. Shows up after big storms. Old oil lantern, bright yellow flame, floats low, about waist high. Stops by the same patch every time. East Hill, behind the birches. He said it so casually that it sounded rehearsed, like a local myth he'd said 100 times. I shrugged it off, but it stuck in my head, especially the part about the same patch. I asked him if he knew who was buried there, and he said, "No one. Stones unmarked." That night, a storm came through, the kind that shakes window glass and makes the whole sky look alive. The power went out twice, and I sat in the office watching the monitors until everything went black for good. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped outside. The air smelled like wet bark and ozone. The rain had slowed to a mist when I noticed a glow near the hill. Not lightning, just a soft, flickering orange light moving between the trees. For a second, I thought maybe Earl had come back for something, but the way it moved didn't look right. It was steady, too slow for a person walking, like someone carrying a flame underwater. I followed it. The grass squelched under my boots, and the beam of my flashlight caught rain hanging in the air like dust. The glow drifted farther up the hill until it stopped at the birches. I remember hearing a low hum from the wind chimes near the caretaker's shed, though there wasn't any breeze. When I reached the top, the light was gone. Nothing but rows of stones slick with rain. My flashlight landed on the unmarked one Earl had mentioned, a short slab of granite, edges rounded by time. The dirt in front of it looked fresh, darker than the rest, but I knew no one had been buried there for decades. I crouched to check it, running my hand along the cold surface, and my fingers brushed something wet. It wasn't rain. It smelled like oil. The next morning I told Earl. He just said, "Told you." A week passed. 2 more storms hit. Both times the lantern showed up. Sometimes it appeared near the west wall first, then glided across the hill, always stopping at that same stone. When I'd get close, it vanished, never fading, just gone like a bulb switched off. I started keeping notes. Time, weather, direction. Each sighting matched the same pattern. Always after a storm. Always within 30 minutes of the rain ending. Always stopping at the unmarked stone for exactly 5 minutes. It bothered me. Not just because it was strange, but because I could predict it. You don't want to admit you believe in something like that, but part of me wanted to prove it wasn't supernatural. Maybe some chemical reaction, swamp gas, who knows. So one night, I set up a camera on a tripod across from the hill and waited inside my truck with the engine off. The storm came late. Thunder, hail, the works. When it finally cleared, the cemetery turned into a foggy ocean. Then it appeared, the light. Through the windshield, I saw it float past the fence and rise along the slope, steady as a pendulum. I watched it stop by the unmarked stone, but then it did something new. It tilted like whoever held it had turned to look directly toward me. The flame brightened, then dimmed, then brightened again. A signal. I froze. Every part of me said, "Stay still." My camera's red light blinked on and off, and I swear I heard soft footsteps outside the truck, just behind me in the gravel. I spun, but nothing was there. When I looked back, the lantern was gone. The footage didn't help. When I checked it the next day, the camera had shut off at exactly 3:14 a.m. Same minute the light appeared. The battery was fine. The file corrupted halfway through, leaving only static and faint whispers like wind under a door. After that, I couldn't sleep during storms. Every rumble of thunder made me check the window. Earl said I looked pale, asked if I wanted time off. I almost took it until I noticed something worse. That unmarked stone, someone had left flowers there. Fresh ones. White lilies tied with red ribbon. No one leaves flowers at Hillcrest except on holidays and never at a blank grave. I asked around. None of the families knew anything. Earl swore he didn't do it. A week later, I found muddy footprints near my shed. Barefoot, small, leading toward the hill. I don't know why I went up there again. Curiosity, guilt, maybe obsession. The night was clear, no storms. I wanted to see the place in peace. The air was still and the trees barely moved. When I reached the stone, the ribbon was gone. The flowers were crushed flat like someone had knelt on them. I turned to leave and saw a faint orange glow forming at the bottom of the slope. But there hadn't been any lightning, no rain, nothing. The flame grew brighter, rising slowly toward me. This time I didn't run. I stood there as it floated up the hill. The shape of the lantern clear now. Old brass, dented handle, glass fogged by soot. Behind it, I swear I saw the faint outline of a hand holding the handle. The light reached the stone, stopped and hung there, swaying slightly, the flame pulsing in rhythm with my heartbeat. Then, as the flame dimmed, I saw my own reflection in the glass and someone standing directly behind me. I spun around, but the hill was empty. When I turned back, the lantern had dropped to the ground, still burning, oil spilling out onto the dirt. I stepped closer, trying to make sense of it, when the flame flared bright blue and went out. leaving nothing but the smell of metal and smoke. I haven't seen it since, but every storm I still drive past Hillcrest Road just to check. The last time I saw something new, the unmarked stone wasn't unmarked anymore. Someone had carved a single word into it, Harlow, and when I looked closer through the rain I realized it was fresh. The cuts were still clean. I don't go near the cemetery at night anymore. But sometimes during thunder I catch the faint glow of a lantern in the trees behind my house, like it's still trying to find its way back to me. I moved to Amarillo in 2019 after my dad passed. My mom couldn't keep up with the old family house, and I figured being closer to her might help. I got a small maintenance job at a local cemetery just outside town, a quiet one off FM 1541, surrounded by windbreaks and open plains. It wasn't bad work. Mowing, trimming hedges, repairing the fence, patching sunken graves. Most of the time it was just me, a portable radio, and the endless sound of wind cutting through dry grass. The caretaker, Ed, was an old rancher type, thin, stooped, gray mustache that never seemed to move when he talked. He'd been there 30 years, easy. He didn't say much during my first week except for one thing. "You'll see the ground out here moves on its own sometimes," he said, while showing me the west lot. I laughed, thinking he was joking about the clay soil expanding in the Texas heat. But he just looked at me and said, "No, I mean it really moves." That stuck in my head. For a few weeks, nothing strange happened. I learned the names on the stones, fixed irrigation leaks, and even started bringing my dog, Tucker, during long shifts. But around late July, I started noticing something weird in the northwest section, the newer plots where people had been buried in the past few years. The ground there would mound up slightly, like the dirt had shifted overnight. Fresh graves, ones I'd leveled myself, looked like something underneath had pushed upward from below. At first, I assumed it was natural settling. Happens all the time. But then I saw one mound that wasn't there the evening before, and it was tall, maybe a foot higher than the rest, the soil loose and slightly damp. I made a note to check it later, but when I came back the next morning, it was completely flat again. I didn't say anything to Ed. I figured I'd just imagined it. Then the next week, 2 visitors came in, a middle-aged woman and her brother, I think. They were upset. Their mother's grave, they said, looked disturbed. When I went with them to see, I froze. The soil over her coffin was visibly raised, almost like it was breathing. The woman bent down, pressing her hand to the ground, and said she could feel warmth. I brushed it off as sun-heated clay, but she looked at me like she knew I was lying. That night I stayed late. I wanted to see for myself. The sky was clear, stars bright, and the air smelled like rain even though no storms were coming. I parked near the fence line, killed the headlights, and walked in with a flashlight. The graves looked calm at first. Then, maybe half an hour later, I heard it. A dull, shifting sound like something pushing through dirt. Not an animal digging. Slower, heavier. I aimed the light toward the noise and saw the ground rising again. The soil moved in slow pulses, pushing upward from below. I backed up so fast I tripped over a headstone. My flashlight rolled off, but I swear I still saw movement even in the dark, a kind of ripple traveling through the ground, like something large was crawling beneath the surface, following the grave's alignment. I grabbed my light and ran back to my truck. The next morning, I told Ed I thought there were animals tunneling under the graves, maybe feral hogs or armadillos. He didn't even look at me. He just said, "They don't tunnel in straight lines, son." Then he walked away. A few days later, the funeral home brought in a new casket for burial. A young guy, maybe 25, killed in a car crash. His family stood by crying while we lowered him down. I tried to keep my focus on the ropes, but my eyes kept drifting to the mounded plots nearby. They looked wrong, too soft, like something had churned the dirt from underneath. When I came back the next morning, that new grave was raised by several inches. I took photos, planning to show Ed, but when I found him, he said something that made my stomach drop. "Don't waste your time," he said. "The county used to re-level them too. Then they just stopped asking questions." That evening, I couldn't stop thinking about it, so I came back again after dark just to watch. I parked in the same spot, turned off my truck, and sat there with the window cracked. For a while, it was silent. Then I heard a faint rustling, not from grass or trees, but from the soil itself. I turned on my flashlight and stepped out slowly. I remember the smell. Wet earth mixed with something sour like old flowers rotting in water. The ground at the far end of the row was shifting again, only this time faster. The dirt rose in sharp bursts like something was pushing hard from underneath. I moved closer, heart hammering. And that's when I saw it. A pale, cracked hand, human unmistakably, broke through the surface for half a second, then vanished again as the soil collapsed around it. I stumbled back, screaming, but before I could move, the next grave started shifting too. Then another. Within seconds, the entire row looked alive. Soil lifting, sinking, lifting again like waves. I bolted. Left the flashlight, the truck door open, everything. I didn't stop running until I reached the highway. When I looked back, I could still see movement under the moonlight, a long, uneven shadow crawling across the ground toward the tree line. The police came after I called from a gas station. By the time they checked the cemetery, everything looked normal. My flashlight was gone. My tire tracks the only evidence I'd been there. The graves were smooth and perfectly flat. They thought I'd had a panic attack or heat stroke. They even called my mom to pick me up. I quit the next morning, packed my things and left Amarillo within a week. A few months later, I was scrolling through local news when I saw a headline, "Cemetery expansion delayed after sinkhole discovery." It was the same cemetery. The article said ground-penetrating radar showed unexplained voids beneath the newer graves, small tunnels connecting several burial plots. Officials planned to dig them up and reinforce the soil. I checked back later for an update, but the story disappeared. The cemetery's website was gone too. It's been years since then. I still get nightmares about it. About the sound of the dirt shifting, the sight of those raised mounds moving in slow, deliberate waves. Sometimes I wonder if Ed's still out there tending to that place, pretending everything's normal. Or if maybe the soil finally rose for him too. Whatever's under there, it's not staying buried. I work for a small groundskeeping company in central Illinois. We handle maintenance for parks, old schools, and a few cemeteries scattered around the state. It's not glamorous work, but it pays the bills, and after a while you stop being weirded out by the places you end up mowing. Dead grass, dead leaves, dead people. It all becomes part of the same routine. This story happened 3 years ago in the fall, at a cemetery just outside a little town called Lacon. It's one of those quiet rural towns you only see when you accidentally take the wrong turn off the highway. Main Street's got a diner, a hardware store, and not much else. The cemetery sat on the edge of a cornfield, maybe 2 acres total, surrounded by rusted iron fencing and a line of maple trees that turned blood red every October. That's when we usually got sent there, to clean up the fallen leaves, trim around the stones, and make sure the gravel paths stayed visible. The cemetery's owned by the county, but nobody really visits it except for the occasional funeral or those weird history buffs that take photos of gravestones. Most of the people buried there died before 1950. There were 3 of us that week. Me, my boss Rick, and a new guy named Brandon. Brandon was 21 maybe, with that kind of eager but clueless attitude new hires always have. He'd never worked a cemetery job before, and I remember him joking about ghosts the first day, asking if the mower engines ever cut out because of spirits. Rick told him if a spirit wanted to help rake leaves, he'd welcome the company. Anyway, it was mid-October. The sky was gray for days, and the wind kept carrying that sweet, earthy smell of wet leaves and dirt. Perfect atmosphere for a place like that. The first time we saw him, the man with the clipboard, was a Wednesday morning around 10:30. We were raking near the west fence when Rick suddenly stopped and pointed. "You see that guy?" About 30 yards down one of the central rows was a man in a gray suit, standing completely still between the headstones. He looked out of place right away. Nobody dressed like that out here. He was tall, maybe 6 feet, with slick black hair and a clipboard tucked under one arm. At first, I thought he might be from the county or some genealogy group checking records. But the weird part was how he moved, or rather didn't move. He'd walk a few steps down a row, pause, write something, then look up again for a long time before taking another few steps. He didn't have a car that we'd seen, and the gate was still locked when we got there that morning. Rick told me to go see what he wanted while he and Brandon kept raking. So I walked over calling out, "Hey sir, can I help you?" He didn't look up. I got maybe 10 feet away when I noticed his shoes. Perfectly polished black leather, except they were covered in mud. Thick, wet clumps like he'd been walking through a field. When I tried again, louder this time, he finally turned his head just slightly toward me. I don't know how to describe the expression, except vacant, like he heard me but wasn't processing the words. His eyes looked dark, almost too dark, and his face was expressionless. He didn't say a word. Just turned back to his clipboard and started walking further down the row. I called after him again, and that's when I noticed his footprints. They were deep, wet imprints in the grass, but the ground was dry. No rain for a week. When I looked back up, he was already turning the corner toward the far section by the fence. I followed for maybe 10 seconds before realizing he was gone. The path curved only a little, and there was nowhere to hide. The fence was tall and closed, no other exits. But he just wasn't there anymore. When I got back to Rick, I told him the guy vanished. Rick didn't believe me until he went to check for himself. We found the footprints, muddy, distinct prints leading halfway down the row, and then they just stopped. Like someone had lifted him straight into the air. That was the first day. The second day, it got stranger. Brandon was bagging leaves near the center monument when he called out, "Hey, there he is again!" Sure enough, the man in the gray suit was back. This time he was closer, maybe 50 feet from us, standing near a cluster of old gravestones with faded dates from the 1800s. Same posture, same clipboard. He looked like he was reading the stones, making notes. Rick shouted across the rows, "Hey, you need something?" No response. The man didn't even glance up. Rick told Brandon to run and get the guy's name, or at least see what he was writing. So Brandon jogged over. I kept raking but kept my eyes on them. He got close, then stopped, maybe 10 feet away. I could see his body tense up like something startled him. He came back a minute later, pale as hell. "He's gone," he said quietly. He just disappeared. We went to check. The clipboard guy was nowhere. But again, muddy footprints, just a few of them this time, stopping in the same way mid-path. Rick decided to call the county office to ask if anyone was supposed to be inspecting the cemetery. They said no one had been scheduled for months. We finished the day uneasy, not saying much. When you work in places like that long enough, you get used to silence, but that day felt wrong. The air was heavy. Every crow or rustle of leaves made Brandon jump. That night, Rick texted us, "Don't go out there early tomorrow. We'll all meet at 9. He didn't explain why. When we got there the next morning, the gate was open already. That never happened. We always had the only set of keys. Rick looked pissed, thinking someone broke in overnight. Near the main path, we found fresh, muddy footprints again. This time they went both ways, coming and going. Rick followed them straight toward the old tool shed by the back fence. The door was cracked open. Inside were our rakes, fuel cans, and a bunch of unused grave markers the county stored for replacement engravings. Nothing seemed missing. Then Brandon pointed at the wall. There were pages pinned up, old yellowed sheets of paper that looked like cemetery records. Lists of names, dates, plot numbers. But here's what made us all go cold. Some of those pages were handwritten in pencil, recently, and every one of those new names was written in neat block letters, including ours. Rick Dawson, crew lead Evan King, groundskeeper, that's me. Brandon Cole, seasonal worker below that. The handwriting continued, listing rows and numbers that didn't exist in the cemetery's layout. Plot 347B, Plot 347C, Plot 347D. The paper had fresh mud smudges along the edge, and a partial fingerprint. Rick ripped the papers down, crumpled them, and threw them into the truck bed. "We're done for today," he said. That was the first time in years I'd ever seen him rattled. We went back the next morning, just Rick and me. Brandon texted saying he quit. Rick didn't argue. When we pulled up, I noticed the gate was locked again, our padlock still intact. Inside, everything looked undisturbed until we reached the west side. A new grave had been dug. It wasn't finished, just a rectangular pit maybe 4 feet deep, right beside an unmarked headstone. There were no tire tracks from a backhoe, no fresh dirt piles anywhere else. It looked dug by hand. At the bottom was a single muddy footprint. Rick didn't say a word. We just stared for a long minute before he turned back toward the truck. That was the last day we worked that cemetery. The county reassigned us after Rick made enough noise about trespassers and safety issues. A new crew got sent out a week later. 2 days after that, Rick called me late at night. He sounded drunk or maybe just terrified. He said, "They found something." The new crew had been clearing near the same west row where the footprints always appeared. When they reached the unmarked headstone, they found the dirt there freshly disturbed, like someone had dug it up and filled it again recently. When they opened it, they found a coffin. No nameplate. Inside were bones, old, yellowed, half crumbling, and resting on top of the ribcage was a metal clipboard. No paper, no writing, just a smear of mud across it. That was the official story anyway. Rick died a few months later. Heart attack, they said. His wife told me he'd been waking up in the middle of the night convinced someone was standing in the hallway outside their bedroom. Said he could hear footsteps that stopped just outside the door. Brandon moved out of state. I haven't heard from him since. As for me, I still work the same job. Different towns, different cemeteries. Every fall when the leaves start to turn, I can't help looking down the rows a little longer than I should. Last week, while working a site near Peoria, I saw muddy footprints again, just 2 of them, leading up to the gate, and there was a piece of paper tucked under the latch. It was blank, except for a penciled line at the bottom where a name should go, and next to it was a fingerprint. Wet. Fresh. I threw it away, but when I got back to my truck, there was a smudge of mud on the clipboard I always keep behind my seat. I don't remember putting it there. It was one of those small-town stories that everyone in the area knew about, but no one talked about unless they'd had a few drinks. The music box grave. That's what people in the southern part of Ohio called it. I grew up only about 20 minutes from the cemetery where it supposedly was. A quiet old place on the edge of the woods just outside of Chillicothe. The story always went the same way. Every night, exactly at 11:47 p.m., a faint lullaby played from beneath one particular headstone. Some people said it was Rock-a-Bye Baby. Others swore it was something older, something no one could quite name. They said the tune came from underground, and no one had ever been able to find the source. I never thought much about it until last summer when I started dating a girl named Erin. She was from the next town over and had that mix of curiosity and recklessness that made her want to chase ghost stories. She'd heard the same rumor growing up, and one night after a few beers, she looked at me and said, "Let's go hear it for ourselves." I should have said no. It was a warm August night, clear sky, the kind that makes sound travel in a weird, hollow way. My friend Kyle came along too, mostly to prove he wasn't scared. We piled into his old pickup and drove down the county road toward the cemetery. The headlights caught nothing but trees and the occasional mailbox until we reached the rusted gate. The cemetery was old. I mean really old. The earliest graves were from the mid-1800s. Most of the stones were cracked, names half worn away. The grass was uneven and tall in places, and the air had that heavy, earthy smell of damp soil and wildflowers. We parked outside the gate and climbed over. Erin was holding her phone flashlight, shining it over the headstones. Kyle kept joking around, trying to keep it light, but even he went quiet after a few minutes, because once we got deeper in, it felt wrong. It wasn't fear exactly. It was this strange stillness, like the air had gone thick. The sounds of crickets, frogs, even the breeze. They all seemed to fade the farther we walked. Erin kept checking the time. "It's 11:43, she whispered. We found the grave around 11:45. It wasn't hard to spot. The one everyone talked about had a flat rectangular stone with a cherub carved into it, holding a little box-shaped object. You could barely make out the name, Lydia Ann Morton, 1892-1898. Erin crouched down, running her fingers over the carving. "She was 6 years old," she murmured. "Poor kid." Kyle was walking around with his phone flashlight pointed at the ground. "You think it's like a wind-up toy or something, under there? Maybe it just plays from a broken mechanism?" I checked my phone. 11:46, Erin whispered. "Shh. One more minute." We stood there in silence, all 3 of us, staring at the stone. And right as my phone clock hit 11:47, I swear on everything, we heard it. It was faint at first, so faint you could almost mistake it for wind. But no, it was a melody. Slow, delicate, like a child's lullaby being played from inside a tin box. It was the kind of tune that should have been comforting, but out there in the dark, it made my stomach twist. Kyle's face went pale. "Dude, tell me you hear that." Erin nodded slowly, eyes wide. "It's coming from under the ground. She set her phone light down and knelt by the stone, pressing her ear to the dirt. Her expression shifted, not scared, but fascinated. "It's right below us," she whispered. Then it stopped. Not faded, stopped, like someone had cut the sound mid-note. We stood there for what felt like a full minute before Kyle broke the silence. "I'm done, man. Let's go." We left fast. None of us said much on the way back to the truck. When I looked over my shoulder, I thought I saw something. A figure standing between the stones, maybe a woman in a light dress. But the second I blinked, she was gone. We didn't tell anyone about it for a while, but a few weeks later, Erin told me she'd been back there with another friend. She said the music hadn't played that time. What did happen, though, was worse. She said she found the grave dug up, not like an animal had done it. This was clean, rectangular, the soil piled neatly to the side. The coffin had been removed. The cops were called, obviously, and according to Erin, they brought in a small crew the next morning to fill it back in. She said they didn't find anything in the coffin, but that wasn't true. I worked part-time at a local diner then, and one of the regulars was a groundskeeper from the same cemetery. His name was Hank, old guy, real quiet. One morning, about a week after the grave was disturbed, he told me something that made my blood run cold. "They didn't tell the press everything," he said. "They found a box, small one, metal, real old, looked like a music box, but it wouldn't open. They sent it to Columbus for analysis or something, but the night after they filled the hole, the sound came back." I laughed nervously, thinking he was joking, but he didn't smile. He just looked tired. "It's been playing ever since," he said, "even when there's snow." A few nights later, I got a call from Erin. She was crying so hard I could barely understand her. She said she'd gone out to the cemetery again with her cousin. She couldn't help herself. Curiosity, guilt, something like that. This time, though, she said the music started earlier, around 11:30, louder than before, clear as day. And when she shined her flashlight toward the grave, she said she saw something sitting on top of it. A little silver box. She said it was playing by itself, the lid slightly open, the handle turning even though no one was touching it. Her cousin tried to film it, but the moment he lifted his phone, the light cut out. Both their phones did. They ran back to the car and drove off. But Erin said she could still hear the lullaby faintly for nearly a mile. After that night, she stopped answering my texts. Her mom told me she'd gone to stay with relatives up north for a while. Kyle moved out of state soon after, said he didn't want that place near him anymore. And me? I haven't gone back, but I still think about it every night around 11:47. Sometimes I swear I can hear something through my open window when the wind's right. A soft, tinny melody drifting through the trees, just faint enough to make me question whether it's really there. A few months ago, I drove past the cemetery on my way home from work. I didn't stop, but I slowed down when I saw flashing lights near the gate. There were county vehicles and a small backhoe. They were digging again. That was 3 weeks ago. The paper said they didn't find anything this time either. But last night at 11:47, someone posted a short video to Facebook. You can't see much, just the cemetery at night, grainy and low res. But if you turn the volume up, you can hear it clear as anything. That same slow, haunting lullaby, playing from somewhere deep underground. I used to work night security at a trucking depot just outside of Las Cruces, New Mexico. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid better than most jobs around town, and for the most part it was quiet. My shift ran from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., which meant I was the only one on duty after midnight. The depot sat about 2 miles off the main highway, surrounded by desert scrub and a few scattered lights from distant farmhouses. It always felt like the edge of the world out there. I had a small office with a wall of monitors showing live camera feeds from the gate, the perimeter fence, and the main lot where the semis parked. My job was simple: check in trucks, keep an eye on the property, and make sure no one wandered in who didn't belong. Most nights were uneventful. Maybe once a week I'd see a coyote dart past the fence or a tumbleweed roll across the gate camera, but one night something showed up that shouldn't have been there. It was around 2 a.m. when I noticed movement on the main gate monitor. The camera had a motion sensor, so when something passed through, it switched from grayscale to color. I looked up expecting a late delivery or maybe one of the drivers who'd gotten lost. Instead, I saw an old red pickup truck rolling slowly toward the gate. At first, I thought it was one of those vintage Fords, maybe from the 70s. Dusty, rust along the edges, but still running. The weird part was that its headlights weren't on. The desert was pitch black and that road had no streetlights, yet this thing was gliding straight down the center line like it could see perfectly fine. I leaned closer to the monitor, squinting. The gate camera wasn't great quality, but I could tell something else was off. I couldn't see a driver. I mean that literally. The windshield reflected a bit of moonlight, and through it, the driver's seat looked empty. No shape, no silhouette, nothing. I thought maybe the camera angle was throwing me off, so I switched to the side camera near the gate booth. The truck rolled up, slowed to a stop, and the engine idled, but there was still no one inside. I checked the logbook, thinking maybe a driver had pre-registered, but there were no scheduled arrivals for the rest of the night. Then the gate opened. I didn't press the button. The system is manual. It doesn't open unless I buzz it or someone uses a key card. I froze, watching the monitor as the red truck eased through the gate like it had been expected. I grabbed my flashlight and radio, heading for the door, but when I stepped outside, I didn't hear an engine. You can always hear them, even from across the lot. The depot at night is so quiet that the hum of a diesel engine echoes off the storage units. But this time, nothing. I hurried to the gate. The truck was gone. No lights, no sound, no dust trail. I stood there in the still air, shining my flashlight across the empty lot. But all I saw were rows of parked trailers glinting in the moonlight. I radioed dispatch, but nobody answered. It was just static. I figured maybe I'd imagined it. Maybe a glitch in the feed. So I went back inside and rewound the footage. That's when it got worse. On the playback, I could see the gate camera again. The same old red pickup easing into view. Only now, on the recording, there was something faintly visible behind the wheel. Not a person exactly, more like a shadow sitting perfectly still. No movement, no outline of arms or head, just a shape. And when the gate opened, that shape turned slightly, as if it looked straight at the camera. The footage cut out for exactly 7 seconds. Then the truck was gone. No tail lights, no tracks, nothing. The next morning, I told my supervisor, Dave, about it. He just laughed and said, "Probably one of the old units from the junkyard. Cameras glitch all the time out here." I asked him to check the physical logs when sometimes older vehicles came in for storage. Nothing. No record of a red pickup. But he humored me and pulled up the overnight gate logs from the last few weeks. The system keeps track of every time the gate opens or closes, even manually. The last entry? 1:59 a.m., the exact time the truck arrived. The system listed the opener as admin. That account was mine. But I didn't open it. A week went by without anything weird, and I started to convince myself it was a tech issue. Then, one Friday night, I noticed something while doing my rounds outside. Near the far end of the lot, where the older trailers sat unused, there were fresh tire tracks in the dirt. Narrow ones, like from a pickup. They led toward a fenced-off section where we kept broken equipment. The padlock was still on, but the dirt around it was disturbed, like someone had tried to lift the gate instead of unlock it. I followed the tracks until they just stopped, midway between two old trailers. The ground was flat, no reason for them to end there. I scanned around with my flashlight and saw a faint red smear on one of the trailer doors. It wasn't blood. It looked like faded paint rubbed off from a vehicle. I backed away, my heart pounding, and went straight back to the office. I checked the cameras again, nothing. That red pickup hadn't shown up on any feed since the first night. But I couldn't shake it, so I started digging through older footage. Our system stores about 90 days worth before it auto-deletes. After an hour of scrolling through timestamp after timestamp, I found something that made my stomach drop. 2 months earlier, same gate, same time, 2:03 a.m., that same red pickup entered the lot. No headlights, no visible driver, and just like before, it never showed leaving. There were 3 other entries just like it, each about 2 weeks apart. I printed the stills from all 4 and laid them side by side. The truck's position, the angle, even the reflections, identical. It was like the same piece of footage copied over itself, except the date stamps were different. I even noticed something else. In the background behind the fence, the desert brush had changed between recordings. The world around the truck was moving forward in time, but the truck wasn't. I brought it all to Dave again. He frowned, clearly annoyed, and said he'd look into it. But the next night when I came in, my login didn't work. The system said access revoked. I called him, but he didn't pick up. I waited around until another guard came to cover my shift, but he told me Dave had transferred me to another depot up north. Except there is no northern depot. I went back a few days later to grab my stuff. The gates were locked and there was a sign saying the property was temporarily closed for maintenance. Through the chain link fence, I could see the lot was empty. Every trailer was gone, except one. In the far corner, under a flickering light, sat that old red pickup. Dusty, still, facing the gate. I don't work security anymore. I moved 3 states away, but sometimes I can't sleep without checking traffic cameras online. I don't even know why. Last week, out of curiosity, I looked up live feeds from rest stops across New Mexico. One camera near mile marker 137 caught my eye. In the far left corner of the frame, just barely visible under the sodium lights, was a red pickup truck. No plates, no driver, parked perfectly still facing the road. The timestamp read 2:00 a.m. It was one of those nights when the air felt heavy and damp, like you could wring it out with your hands. The kind of Louisiana night where even the mosquitoes seemed too tired to bite. I was working late at a small cemetery just outside of Houma, digging a grave that needed to be ready by morning. The funeral director had called me around 7 p.m., said there'd been a last-minute service scheduled for sunrise. I didn't ask questions. I just packed my thermos, a pack of cigarettes, and drove my old Ford out to the cemetery. I've been a gravedigger for nearly 20 years. It's not glamorous, but it's honest work. You learn to be comfortable being alone with the dead. The job mostly comes down to muscle memory. Line up the headstone markers, check the map, dig 6 feet down, tamp the walls, smooth the edges. You do that long enough and the dark stops feeling like something to be afraid of, or at least that's what I used to tell myself. The grave that night was at the far corner of the property, close to the tree line. The cemetery lights didn't quite reach that far, so I had to set up my own floodlights powered by a small generator. Their buzzing hum was the only sound besides the crickets and the occasional croak of a bullfrog from the bayou nearby. I always thought that sound was comforting. The hum, the quiet, the rhythm of the shovel hitting the earth. It was about 11 p.m. when I started hearing it. My name, faint like someone whispering through a pipe. Earl. I froze. The shovel was mid-air. I turned off the generator, thinking maybe it was just the wind or some static distortion. The silence that followed was thick, almost suffocating. No frogs, no crickets, nothing. Just stillness. I told myself it was my imagination and went back to work. But when I got down to about 6 feet deep, I heard it again. Closer this time. Earl. It was unmistakable. A man's voice, deep and low, like it was coming from inside the ground. I leaned over the edge of the grave, shining my flashlight into the dirt. The beam caught nothing but the rough walls and my own shadow shifting across them. My pulse was pounding, but I told myself it was just an echo, maybe from someone walking by the fence. So I climbed out, looked around, and checked the road. No cars, no footsteps. Just the still night and the trees swaying in the dark. I was alone. I tried to shake it off, telling myself fatigue was getting to me. Grave digging is hard on the body, especially when you're pushing 50. I took a long swig from my thermos, lit a cigarette, and kept digging. Around midnight, I hit something hard. My shovel made a dull clunk like striking old wood. That wasn't unusual. Sometimes we find bits of coffin planks from forgotten plots, but when I brushed away the dirt, I saw it wasn't wood at all. It was metal. An old rusted handle attached to what looked like a small hatch. I thought it must have been a burial vault or an old maintenance access. Something left over from the 1800s when this cemetery first opened. But as I cleared more dirt, the outline didn't match any vault I'd ever seen. It was too small. About 3 feet across, circular like a manhole lid. I knelt down and scraped the mud from the top. Faded letters were etched into the metal. Property of St. Vincent Parish, 1892. That was strange. St. Vincent Parish wasn't even the name of this county. Hadn't been for over 100 years. I radioed the funeral director, told him I'd found something old and needed to stop the dig until morning. But the radio only hissed back at me, white noise and static. When I set it down, I heard the whisper again. Earl. Open it. I nearly dropped my light. The voice came from directly below me this time. I could feel it through the ground, and like the soil itself was vibrating. I scrambled out of the hole, heart hammering so hard it made me dizzy. I stood there trying to catch my breath, staring down into the open grave, half expecting something to move in the shadows. But it was silent again. That silence lasted maybe a minute, and then, I swear, I heard a faint tapping. 3 knocks. From underneath the hatch, that was it for me. I packed my tools, killed the lights, and sat in my truck for a good 10 minutes before I had the nerve to drive off. I told myself I'd report it in the morning and let the parish decide what to do. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I shut my eyes, I swore I heard that same tapping. The next morning, the funeral director called, furious. Said I'd left the grave unfinished. I tried to explain about the hatch, the voice, the tapping, but he just sighed and told me to stop drinking on the job. I drove back that afternoon just to prove what I'd found. But when I got there, the grave was perfectly smooth, filled in, tamped down, even covered with fresh sod, like someone had finished it overnight, except I knew I hadn't. When I checked the work log, it said the grave had been completed and signed off at 3:42 a.m. by me. My name, my signature, but I hadn't been there. I'd been at home, sitting awake on my couch until sunrise. That was the first night. After that, every time I worked late, it happened again. The whisper, always after 6 feet. Sometimes it said my name, sometimes it said other things it couldn't possibly know. Like my daughter's name, or the song my late wife used to hum when she baked. At first I tried to ignore it, but soon the other diggers started noticing too. They'd say they heard me talking to someone over the radio when I hadn't touched it. One guy, Reggie, said he saw a figure standing at the edge of the floodlights. A man in muddy work clothes just watching me dig. When he called out, it didn't move. He blinked and it was gone. The worst part came 2 weeks later. I was filling in a grave after a burial when I realized the dirt at my boots was trembling. Not from footsteps or thunder. It was like something beneath the soil was shifting. I froze. The tremor grew stronger, pulsing in rhythm with my heartbeat. Then faintly I heard it again, Earl, only this time it wasn't alone. Dozens of whispers rose up all around me, like the ground itself was breathing names. Different voices, and men, women, even a child. Calling, murmuring, some weeping. The air grew colder. The floodlights flickered, and I dropped my shovel, stumbling backward until I hit a headstone. I was surrounded by graves, each one whispering. The names carved into the stones seemed to shimmer in the dim light, like they were being rewritten. Then, as suddenly as it started, it stopped. Silence. The next morning, I told the director I was done with night work. He didn't argue. I guess the look on my face said enough. But a few nights later, my phone rang around 2 a.m., unknown number. I let it go to voicemail. But curiosity got the better of me. When I played it back, I almost dropped the phone. It was me. My voice, breathing hard, whispering, Earl, 6 feet's not enough. The recording cut out. I called the police. They said it was probably a prank. Maybe one of the younger diggers messing around. But none of them had my number. And when I checked the call log, it said the voicemail had come from my own phone number. I started keeping track after that. Dates, times, names. And I realized a pattern. Every grave I dug that reached past 6 feet, every single one, had a small circular patch of softer soil near the bottom, like something had been buried there long ago and replaced. The same spot every time. A month later, the sheriff's office came around asking questions about missing persons. Turns out there were reports of old bones showing up downstream after a flood. They said they might have been disturbed graves from the cemetery, and they wanted to check our site. I gave them permission, but when they dug, they didn't find any of the metal hatches. Not one, just normal coffins. Still, the next night, I couldn't sleep. Around 3:40 a.m., I went back to the cemetery just to look. The floodlights were off, but one section near the back was faintly glowing, like the ground itself was lit from underneath. When I got closer, I saw that one of the graves, the one I dug on that first night, had sunk slightly in the center. The grass was damp and the soil looked freshly turned. I knelt down, brushed away some of the dirt, and my fingers hit metal. The same rusted handle, the same hatch, and then I heard it, not a whisper this time, a breath, right against my ear. Welcome back, Earl. The ground shuddered beneath me, and I felt something cold wrap around my wrist. Not like a hand, but like a rope, pulling me down. I yanked free, fell backward, scrambled up, and ran for the truck so fast I nearly tripped over a headstone. By the time I looked back, the light was gone. The hatch was gone. The next morning, when the funeral crew came in, they said the grave looked untouched. No sign anyone had been there. That was 2 years ago. I quit soon after. Moved 2 towns over, got a job repairing boats. But sometimes when I walk past the bayou, I still hear my name in the water. Last week I got a call from the new gravedigger at Huma Cemetery. He said something weird happened while he was digging late one night. Said he found a patch of soft soil and a rusted metal handle underneath. He asked if I'd ever come across anything like that before. I told him no, but that night my phone buzzed again. No number, just a voicemail. When I played it, I heard my own voice whispering, 6 feet's not enough. It was a small cemetery on the edge of a Vermont village, tucked behind a patch of birch and maple trees where the wind always seemed to move differently. Slower, heavier, like it carried the weight of whispers. I started working there in the spring of 2021, doing simple maintenance, mowing the grass, clearing fallen branches, scrubbing the old stones when the moss grew too thick. Part of my routine was taking photographs every Sunday for the Historical Society. They liked to document seasonal changes, damage, or any repairs that might be needed. I didn't mind, I liked the quiet. The place had a peaceful kind of sadness. The first time I saw the man, it didn't register as strange. It was mid-April, the air still sharp from winter. I'd just finished trimming around the far row of graves, and as I took the weekly set of photos, I noticed an old man kneeling beside one of the older headstones. He was wearing a dark overcoat and a cap, his posture stiff like he'd been there a while. He had his hands clasped in front of him, head bowed. I didn't want to intrude, so I took the photo quickly and kept walking. When I reviewed the pictures later that evening, he was still there, motionless, almost perfectly centered in the frame. The headstone he knelt before belonged to a man named Elias Warren. Born 1887, died 1962, nothing unusual about it. The next Sunday, I did my rounds again. The same section, the same headstone, the same man, same posture, same dark coat. I remember thinking maybe it was an old relative who visited weekly, but something about it nagged at me. He hadn't moved an inch in the new picture. When I compared it to the first one, it looked identical down to the angle of his hands. I convinced myself it was coincidence. Maybe I'd caught him at the same moment in prayer. By the 3rd week, I was curious. I planned to time my rounds differently, just to see if he came at a certain hour. I arrived before sunrise that Sunday around 5:30. The grass was still wet with dew, mist rising off the low ground. I walked toward Elias Warren's grave, and for the first time it was empty. No man, no footprints in the soft soil. I took my photos and left. But when I uploaded them later that afternoon, my stomach turned. In the new image and the one I'd taken with no one around, the man was there again, kneeling. Same pose. His head turned slightly toward the camera this time. His face was soft and unfocused, like something blurred in motion. But I swear his mouth looked open, as if caught mid-breath. I told my supervisor, a guy named Russ, who'd worked the grounds for decades. He laughed it off. Said maybe it was lens flare or some trick of exposure. I showed him the 3 photos side by side, though, and his expression changed. He got quiet, then said something that stuck with me. That plot's been empty since I started here. The Warren family's all long gone. Elias is buried there, yeah, but no one's visited that grave in years. After that, I couldn't stop checking. Every week, same routine. I'd take the photo, and no matter what time or weather, he appeared, always kneeling. Sometimes his face turned slightly toward me, sometimes away. In one picture, his hands were pressed flat against the dirt. Another week, his cap was missing, revealing thin white hair matted to his head like he'd come up from the ground. I started researching the name. There wasn't much. Elias had been a farmer, apparently well-liked, lived a quiet life until he died in 1962. The local library kept an archive of the old town paper. In the obituary section from that year, I found something odd. There was no mention of a wife or children, but there was a single line at the end. Interment postponed pending family arrangements. No follow-up ever printed. I thought maybe the burial had been delayed. Maybe they'd buried an empty coffin. The thought didn't sit right with me, especially considering that in every photo the man's clothes looked slightly dirtier each week. The fabric darkened, frayed at the edges as if aging in fast motion. By midsummer, I stopped showing the photos to Russ. He said I was spooking myself, but I knew what I was seeing. I even started marking the grass with chalk before taking the shots, hoping to prove he was physically there. But the chalk never disturbed. No footprints, no bent blades, nothing. One morning in late August, I decided to stay overnight. I brought a folding chair, a thermos, and my camera, and I sat by the stone row as dusk fell. Around 2 in the morning, the fog rolled in so thick it muffled everything. I remember hearing something soft, like dry leaves shifting under weight. I turned on my flashlight and swept it across the graves. The beam caught something pale between the stones. A face, just the briefest glimpse before it vanished into the mist. When I checked the camera's live view, my hands went cold. The screen showed the same man kneeling, clear as day, even though the grass in front of me was empty. He was staring directly at the lens now, eyes black and wet-looking, mouth closed but stretched in an awful expression that might have been a smile. I packed up and left without even folding the chair. The following week I called out sick, but Russ said the society still needed the weekly photos. He went himself. That Sunday evening I got a text from him, just one line. "You weren't kidding." I saw him, he didn't come in the next day. 2 days later, his wife called the office to say he'd been admitted to the hospital. Heart attack. He survived, but he never came back to work. When I visited him months later, he told me something quietly, like he was ashamed of it. It wasn't just a man, he said. It was like it knew we were watching. I left the job after that winter. Couldn't take the cemetery anymore. The Historical Society still does their Sunday records, though. A new groundskeeper took over, young guy, eager. A few weeks ago, out of curiosity, I checked their online archive. They post the images publicly, labeled by date. The most recent one, from last Sunday, shows a familiar figure kneeling at Elias Warren's grave. Only now he's not alone. There's another man beside him, bent in the same posture, same coat, same cap. And I know for certain it's Russ. I used to work for a maintenance crew at a small state park in southern Oregon, just outside of a town called Glide. The park wasn't anything fancy, some trails, a small visitor center, a couple of rental cabins near the river. It was the kind of quiet place retirees liked to volunteer at and teenagers used for camping trips. There was an old maintenance shed near the tree line, about 100 feet from the main cabin. It looked older than the rest of the park buildings. Metal siding with rust spots, a warped wooden door, and a roof that sagged on one side. The previous caretaker, a guy named Tom, said it used to be part of the ranger station back in the 1950s before the new one was built. When I started the job in spring, the shed was just part of my daily routine. I'd unlock it in the morning, grab tools, refill gas cans, and check inventory. Everything was normal, until I noticed the lock. The padlock on the door was one of those heavy-duty master locks, but the weird part was that it locked from the inside. There was a small slit between the door and the frame where you could see the latch, definitely closing from within. I remember joking to Tom about it one morning, and he just said, "Yeah, that door's always been like that. Don't worry about it." But he wouldn't meet my eyes when he said it. A few weeks later, I was working the night shift. The park wasn't technically open after dark, but sometimes we had to stay late. Power outages, break-ins, raccoons getting into trash bins, that sort of thing. That night, I was checking the generator behind the main office when I heard something metal clanging near the tree line. It was faint but rhythmic, like someone hitting the shed door with a wrench. I called out, thinking it was a teenager or one of the volunteers playing a prank. No response. I shined my flashlight across the field, and for a second I thought I saw someone duck behind the shed. I started walking toward it, keeping the light steady. The night was quiet except for the wind and the creek nearby. When I reached the shed, everything was still. The door was closed, the padlock hanging open, just dangling there like someone had undone it seconds before. I leaned in and saw something that made my stomach turn. The inside latch, the one that always locked from within, was in the locked position. There was no way to reach it from outside. I stepped back, thinking maybe Tom had come by earlier and I hadn't noticed. But when I looked down, I saw the key lying in the dirt, half buried in mud. I picked it up, wiped it off, and pocketed it. The next morning, I mentioned it to the crew. They all got quiet. One of the older guys, Ray, finally spoke up and said, "You found the key, huh?" Apparently, that wasn't the first time it had happened. Every month or so, usually around the full moon, the door would somehow lock itself from the inside overnight. By morning, the key would be found somewhere outside, on the steps, in the grass, even once in the creek. I didn't believe in any of that superstitious stuff, so I decided to keep an eye on it. A few nights later, during another late shift, I stayed in the office until after midnight. The moon was bright enough to light up the whole field. Around 1:30 a.m., I saw movement near the shed again. This time I didn't call out. I grabbed my flashlight and walked straight toward it. When I got about 20 feet away, I saw the door slowly creak open. It wasn't the wind, the air was still. Something or someone was inside. I called out softly, "Tom? That you?" No answer. The light caught the edge of the door, then a glimpse of something pale inside. I thought it was an arm at first, but it didn't move right. It just sort of swayed like it was hanging. I stepped closer, heart pounding, and that's when the door slammed shut, so hard it rattled the hinges. The lock clicked, I froze. My flashlight shook in my hand and I backed away until I was halfway to the office. I didn't sleep that night. In the morning, I went back with Ray. The door was locked from the inside again and the key was lying in the same dirt spot as before. I told him what I saw and he just sighed. "You should have left it alone," he said. "Tom tried the same thing once." That caught my attention. "What do you mean?" Ray said Tom had gone missing 3 years earlier. Just disappeared one night after telling everyone he was going to reorganize the shed. They found his truck by the main gate, keys still in the ignition. Nobody ever opened that shed after that. When I asked if they'd ever searched it, Ray said the county guys tried, but the door wouldn't budge. Not even when they cut the lock off. It was like it was sealed shut from the inside. That night I decided to see for myself. I know how that sounds, but I had to know. I took a crowbar and flashlight and went down to the shed around midnight. The air felt heavier than usual, like the pressure dropped. The woods were dead quiet. When I reached the shed, the door was already slightly open, just enough to see the darkness inside. The smell hit me first. It wasn't rot exactly, more like damp earth mixed with something metallic. I stepped in. The air was colder in there, and the light barely cut through it. The shelves were covered in dust and there were old tools scattered across the floor. But what caught my attention was a chair in the corner, facing the wall. A set of footprints in the dirt led to it, bare feet. And written on the wall, scratched deep into the wood, were words that made no sense at first. "Don't unlock it when it knocks." Before I could think, there was a faint sound from behind the wall. 3 slow knocks. I froze. My body went numb. The knocks came again, louder this time, shaking the boards. I ran. By the time I reached the office, the door to the shed was closed again. The lock was in place. The next morning, the key was found lying on the ground. I quit that week. Last I heard, the new maintenance guy took over this summer. He told me he keeps hearing tapping noises at night coming from the direction of the shed. And last month, he sent me a text. The key wasn't there this morning. The door's open. No one's heard from him since. I've worked at Cypress Hill Cemetery, a small family-run burial ground in northern Florida, for almost 12 years. It's quiet, isolated, and mostly forgotten, surrounded by moss-draped oaks and wetlands that hum with crickets at night. I handle the maintenance, mowing the grass, trimming hedges, and sometimes helping out with burials when the undertaker's short-staffed. It's lonely work, but I've always liked that. This story happened in early March of 2019. The weather was damp and heavy, the kind of Florida humidity that clings to your skin. We'd had a series of storms that week, and one afternoon my boss, Gary, asked me to check the drainage near the far end of the cemetery, the oldest section. That's where the ground tends to sink after heavy rain. That area is different from the rest. The graves there date back to the late 1800s. Some of the headstones lean, their names almost worn away. It's the kind of place that always feels a few degrees colder than everywhere else, even on a hot day. I drove the maintenance cart down the gravel path with my coworker, Miguel. He's younger, early 20s, and always joking around, blasting music from his phone while we work. But as we got closer to the old section, he turned it off. "Man, this part creeps me out," he said. I laughed it off, but truth be told, I felt it too. We parked by the oak trees and started inspecting the ground. That's when Miguel noticed something strange. "Hey," he called, "come look at this." There was a small grave, white marble, maybe 3 feet long. A child's grave. The nameplate read Clara May Wilton, 1911-1918. I'd seen it before, but this time something was off. The glass viewing panel on top of the coffin, an old-fashioned style popular in the early 1900s, was cracked open. Not shattered, just lifted slightly, as if the lid had been pried up an inch. At first I thought maybe the storm had shifted the ground and warped it. But then I saw it, A tiny handprint. It was pressed against the inside of the glass. Miguel froze.
That's
From the inside, right? I nodded, crouching closer. It wasn't old. You could see the smudge of the palm, the streaks where fingers had dragged downward. My stomach turned. I looked for signs of vandalism, but the grave was undisturbed, no footprints, no signs of tools. Gary told us to reseal it and not make a big deal. Moisture and gas buildup, he said. You'd be surprised what pressure does underground. But that didn't explain the print. That night I couldn't stop thinking about it. I went back after dark, something I'd never done before. I told myself it was to check for trespassers, but really I wanted to see it again. When I reached the old section, the cemetery lights barely reached that far. I walked by flashlight, the beam cutting through a thin mist that had rolled in. The insects had gone silent. It was so still I could hear my own breathing. The little marble grave looked the same, except the lid wasn't just cracked anymore. It was open. Halfway open. My heart started pounding. I swung the light toward it, and that's when I heard it. A faint sound from inside. A scraping like fingernails on wood. I froze. Every instinct told me to run, but my legs wouldn't move. I whispered, "Hello?" The sound stopped. Then after a few seconds, a small knock came from inside the coffin. I dropped the flashlight. I don't remember running back to the cart, only that my hands were shaking so badly I could barely start it. I drove straight to the caretaker's office and called Gary. When he arrived with 2 sheriff's deputies, I refused to go back there. But they did. They came back 20 minutes later looking pale. They said the lid was closed when they got there, sealed tight, no handprints, nothing unusual. They figured I'd imagined it. The next morning, the county coroner's office came to inspect the area. Apparently, someone higher up wanted to make sure no grave robbing had occurred. They opened the casket under official supervision. Inside was the small skeleton of a child, intact, resting peacefully. Except one thing. The bones of her right hand were missing. They sealed the coffin again, wrote it off as decay or animal disturbance, and moved on. But I quit a month later. I couldn't stand walking past that section anymore. Sometimes, though, on humid nights when the air feels heavy, I dream about the sound of fingernails scraping wood. And in the dream, I'm back at that grave, staring down through the glass. Only this time, there's no handprint. There's a face, and it's smiling. I used to work the night shift at a small data relay station just outside Trinidad, Colorado. Most people don't even know those buildings exist. They look like bunkers, windowless concrete boxes in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by chain-link fences and humming lights. This one was tucked behind a patch of forest about 4 miles off the main road. It handled data from the nearby rail lines and power grid. It was boring, repetitive work, but it paid the bills and let me listen to music all night, so I didn't complain. There were 3 of us total who rotated nights: me, Maria, and our supervisor, Jack. Jack handled reports and maintenance, Maria covered the earlier shifts, and I came in at midnight to take over. By then, the world outside was completely dead. You could step outside and hear nothing but wind. The weirdness started in February. I remember because snow still covered most of the ground, and I was already tired of scraping my windshield every morning. That night, around 3 a.m., I noticed one of the monitors flicker. It was the west yard camera, the one facing the fence line. Just a quick burst of static, then it went back to normal. I didn't think much of it. Those cameras were ancient, but when it happened again the next night at almost the exact same time, I started paying attention. The third night it happened right at 3:09 a.m. The image glitched for a second, and in that split second I thought I saw someone, standing by the fence. I froze, rewound the feed. Frame by frame, there it was. A tall, dark figure maybe 20 feet from the camera pole. 1 frame only, then gone. I showed Jack the next morning. He laughed it off. Probably interference from the repeater tower, he said. Or compression noise. These lines are old. That was typical Jack, practical, skeptical, and tired. I still didn't like it, though. I'd worked there for 2 years, and that feed had never once done anything like that. Every night after that, I started watching for it. And every single night at 3:09 on the dot, the feed glitched for 1 frame. Every single time the figure was there. And every time it was a little bit closer to the camera. By the 5th night, I'd started setting an alarm. I'd lean forward, coffee in hand, waiting for the moment to hit. The glitch came and there it was again. Closer now, maybe 10 feet from the pole. Still just a black outline against the snow. No face, no details. Just standing there. I took a photo of the monitor with my phone, but when I zoomed in, it was just a mess of pixels. I told Maria about it the next night during shift change. She frowned and said she'd noticed something weird too. That west yard feed keeps freezing around 3, she said. I thought it was the storm, but it's always the same camera. I asked if she ever saw anyone in it, and she just looked at me for a second before shaking her head. Don't even joke like that. It's creepy enough out here. That Friday she came in late because of the snow and stayed an extra half hour to finish some reports. She was packing up when she looked at the monitors and said, "That's the one, right? The west yard?" I nodded. She stared at it a second, then laughed nervously. For a second, it looked like someone was standing by the fence. Then she grabbed her bag and left. The following Sunday, the glitch happened again. But this time, something was different. The screen didn't just flicker. It went completely black for a few seconds. I tried rebooting the feed, switching inputs, checking the signal, but it stayed blank until exactly 3:09. Then the image came back, but it wasn't showing the yard anymore. It was showing the control room, my control room, and for that one frame I could see myself sitting at the desk, staring at the monitors. Behind me, in the reflection of the equipment cabinet, was that same tall figure, standing in the corner of the room. I spun around so fast I nearly knocked over my chair. The corner was empty. My heart was pounding. I checked the hallway, the side door, even outside. Nothing, not even footprints in the snow. I didn't finish my shift that night. I stayed by the door with my jacket on, waiting for the sun to come up. When I told Jack about it the next day, he didn't laugh. He looked genuinely concerned, but I could tell he thought I'd imagined it. Still, he agreed to replace the camera. He even had maintenance swap out the wiring and reset the relay station's power grid. The next night, the system rebooted clean. I thought maybe that was it. But at 3:09, the new west yard feed flickered again. No static this time, just a single flash of another image. It looked like the inside of the storage closet down the hall. The one that didn't even have a camera installed. I checked it immediately. Empty. Just shelves, old routers, and spare cables. But for some reason, the air inside felt colder than the rest of the building. Like someone had just opened a freezer. I shut the door and went back to my desk, but I couldn't bring myself to look at the monitors anymore. A week later, Maria quit. She said she didn't feel comfortable working nights anymore. Jack said she'd found a better job, but I could tell she was spooked. That left just me and him running extra shifts until corporate sent a replacement. That's when things started to escalate. I began hearing noises. Faint, irregular knocks inside the walls, footsteps on the concrete floor when I knew I was alone. Sometimes I'd catch a shadow moving across the hallway through the glass office door. Once I heard whispering near the server racks, like someone talking quietly but too far away to make out words. I told Jack, and he said it was probably the air ducts expanding or the building settling. Then one night he called me while reviewing the live feeds from home. It was around 3:12 a.m. "Eric," he said, his voice shaking. "Don't move. Look at the west yard feed." I turned toward the monitors and my stomach dropped. The feed wasn't showing the yard anymore. It was showing the control room again. The same angle as before, but slightly higher, like it was being filmed from the ceiling corner. And in that image, standing directly behind me, was a man. He was tall, wearing dark clothes. No face, no light reflecting off his body. Just standing there, maybe 2 feet away from the back of my chair. I turned around in real life, and there was nothing. When I looked back at the screen, the image had switched back to the yard. Empty as always. Jack showed up the next morning, pale and jumpy. He ordered a full diagnostic on every server and every cable. IT spent an entire week testing for interference, checking logs, running software scans. They found nothing unusual. No malware, no network intrusion, no signal crossover. The footage was authentic. It existed. We both saw it. After that, Jack stopped taking night shifts. I followed not long after. The company eventually switched the whole station to automation. Now it runs with remote monitoring only. No more night technicians. The lights stay on, the gates stay locked, and the feeds run on a loop. Still, every now and then when I drive home late from town, I pass that dirt road leading to the relay station. The fence lights are dim but visible from the highway. And if I time it just right, when my clock hits 3:09, I swear I see the security lights flicker. Just once. Last month, curiosity got the better of me. I pulled over and checked the live feeds online. They're still public for employees. The West Yard camera still flickers at 3:09 every night. For one frame, you can still see a shadow standing by the fence. Only now, when you brighten the image, you can see something else faintly reflected in the camera's lens. The interior of the control room behind it. And in that reflection, you can make out the faint outline of someone sitting at the desk staring at the monitors. Someone who isn't supposed to be there. It's a local story that most people in our small Pennsylvania town treat as an old legend. Something passed down to scare new hires or entertain the guests during slow nights. But I worked at that place for nearly 3 years, and I'm telling you, it's not a legend. It's real. I was a night custodian at a small historic inn about 40 minutes outside of Harrisburg. It was built in the 1800s, the kind of place people book for authentic charm or romantic getaways. Every Easter weekend, we'd get a flood of visitors because the nearby church hosted a sunrise service in the field behind the property. That field, by the way, used to be part of an old farm cemetery. When I first started, the manager, a guy named Rick, warned me jokingly. "Don't stay out back around sunrise," he said. "That's when she walks." I laughed it off. Everyone did. They called her the visitor in white. Supposedly, every Easter morning, a barefoot woman in a long white dress was seen crossing the frost-covered lawn behind the inn. They said she never looked up, never spoke, and left no footprints. I didn't believe it until my second year working there. The setup. It was early April, cold enough that the ground was still frozen. I was assigned to cover the overnight shift before Easter morning because the regular guy called out sick. My job was simple: keep the lobby tidy, refill the coffee for early guests, and make sure the church group had access to the outdoor restrooms. Around 3 a.m., everything was quiet except for the occasional creak of the old floorboards and the wind against the windows. The guests were asleep, and I was in the lobby wiping down the check-in counter when I noticed movement outside. Something pale near the tree line. At first I thought it was fog or maybe a reflection, but then I saw it again. A white figure standing still at the far end of the field. The build-up. I went closer to the window. The frost on the grass shimmered under the security lights, and that figure, it was a woman. I could make out the shape of a long gown brushing against her ankles. Her hair looked dark, hanging loose over her shoulders. She was facing away from me toward the old church. I figured maybe one of the guests got up early for the service, so I stepped outside to tell her the church gate wasn't open yet. The air hit me like ice. My breath came out in thick clouds, but she didn't seem to notice the cold at all. When I called out, "Ma'am, are you staying here?" She didn't move, not even a flinch. Her arms hung at her sides, fingers slightly curled. The longer I looked, the more wrong she seemed. Her dress was too bright, pure white, almost glowing faintly in the dark. And though the ground was slick with frost, she was barefoot. I remember glancing down at the grass as I approached. That's when I noticed it, no footprints. Mine were clear as day behind me, but she hadn't left a single mark. I froze. That was the first moment I actually felt afraid. The climax. She started to move, not toward me, but straight ahead, gliding across the lawn. Her steps didn't disturb the frost at all. The motion was smooth, too smooth. I could hear my own heartbeat echoing in my ears. Then, as she reached the far end of the property, she turned slightly, just enough that I saw her face. It was blank. Not like she had no expression, she had no features. No eyes, no mouth, just pale, smooth skin stretched tight over the shape of a head. I stumbled backward, nearly slipping on the icy steps. My flashlight fell from my hand, rolling across the porch. When I looked up again, she was gone. The field was empty, but the frost where she'd been walking was gone, melted into a long, wet path stretching all the way to the cemetery fence. The aftermath. When Rick came in that morning, I told him everything. He just nodded slowly, like he'd been waiting for me to say it. "You saw her," he said quietly. "Happens every Easter. Used to be the old owner's wife, or so they say. Died waiting for him to come home from the war. She walks the field looking for him every spring." I didn't believe the story, but I couldn't explain what I'd seen. The melted trail was still there hours later, even after the sun came up. A couple of guests mentioned a lady in white near the fence during the sunrise service. The cameras outside didn't show anything, just static between 3 and 4 a.m. I worked there for another 6 months, but never took another Easter shift. The following year, I quit altogether. Still, every spring when the air gets cold again and I see frost on the grass, I think about her. That blank, featureless face, those silent steps. And sometimes I dream about standing on that porch again, watching her cross the field toward the fence until she slowly turns her head and finally looks at me. But this time, she has a face, and it's mine. I work for a small restoration company that handles old churchyards and historical sites across Suffolk. Last summer, my coworker Ben and I were assigned to clean up an abandoned cemetery near an old parish ruin outside Lavenham. It was one of those jobs nobody wanted, overgrown, remote, and a 2-hour drive from anywhere decent. The church had crumbled centuries ago, but the graves were still there, sunken, uneven, some swallowed by ivy and roots. We arrived early on a gray Tuesday morning. The air felt heavy, damp, like the world hadn't quite woken up yet. You could smell the soil, that cold mineral smell that sticks to your clothes. The church's stone arch was still standing, half buried in nettles with weathered carvings along the top. That's where I first noticed the plague stones. They were these flat limestone slabs with faint Latin inscriptions carved around the edges. Local lore said they were from the Black Death years, places where villagers would leave coins soaked in vinegar for merchants to avoid touching hands. The parish records mentioned them only briefly. Stones of offering sanctified by suffering. Creepy but fascinating. Ben was more practical. He didn't care about history. He just wanted to clear the brush, finish early, and grab a pint before heading home. We unloaded our tools and started cutting through the undergrowth. The silence around the place was unnatural. No birds, no wind, nothing. Just our boots crunching on gravel and the occasional hum of the trimmer. Around midday, I took a break near the largest plague stone, brushing off dirt to read the Latin letters. The words were faint, but I could make out something like venit ad me et ego vos suscipiam. I remembered enough school Latin to know venit meant come. I don't know why, but that word made me uneasy. We worked until dusk, and as the sun started dipping, the temperature dropped fast. Suffolk evenings can be brutally quiet. You feel like sound itself is being swallowed by the mist. That's when Ben asked if I heard something. At first I didn't. Then, under the hum of the trimmer, I caught it, a faint whispering. It was so soft I thought it was the wind moving through the reeds, except it wasn't. It was rhythmic, like someone murmuring just out of earshot. We turned off the equipment and stood still. The whispering continued. Latin again. Venit, venit. Over and over. We searched the grounds, thinking maybe a local kid was messing with us. But there was no one. Just those tilted graves leaning in strange directions like they'd been disturbed. The mist rolled in thicker, and our visibility dropped to a few feet. Ben, trying to laugh it off, said, "Probably air coming through the old vaults, like a pipe organ." But I could see he was spooked. His hands were shaking when he lit a cigarette. We packed up quickly, but I forgot my work gloves by the plague stone. When I went back to grab them, I noticed something that made my stomach twist. The soil near the stone had sunk slightly, like something had shifted underneath. The whispering was louder now, clearer. "Venit, at me." It was calling. I stumbled backward and nearly tripped over another grave. Ben was shouting for me from the van, his voice muffled by the fog. I didn't answer right away because I could see something. Faint figures in the mist crouched near the stones. They weren't solid. More like dark impressions, outlines shaped by the fog itself. And they were whispering together. I bolted. We didn't stop driving until we hit the main road. Neither of us spoke for a while. Finally, Ben said, "Did you hear what they said?" I nodded. He looked pale, terrified in a way I'd never seen before. They were saying, "Come closer." That night I couldn't sleep. I kept hearing the whispering in my dreams, muffled and close to my ear. I woke up sweating, the phrase still echoing in my head. The next morning I texted Ben to check in. No reply. By noon his girlfriend called me and he hadn't come home. The police found his van parked by the cemetery gate, doors open, tools still inside. His footprints led back toward the ruin, and just stopped at the plague stones. The area around them looked freshly disturbed again, like someone had been digging. They never found him. I haven't gone back there since, but sometimes I dream of that place and the cold mist, the gray light, the low whispering that seems to come from the ground itself. And in those dreams, I swear I can hear Ben's voice among them, repeating the same words. "Venit, venit. Come closer." I studied architecture at Charles University in Prague back in 2016. During my second year, I rented a small flat on Vyšehradska Street, not far from the old cemetery. It wasn't the cheapest area, but the building was owned by an old couple who barely charged students rent as long as we respected the dead. That was their phrase. I thought it was just a weird local superstition at first. The cemetery was beautiful in its own way. Centuries-old graves, elaborate stone angels, names half erased by rain. From my window, I could see the wrought iron gate and the caretaker's shack just beyond it. There was an old man who worked there, thin, stooped, always in the same brown coat and hat. The neighborhood called him the watchman. He didn't talk much, but every night around sunset, you'd see him light candles on certain graves. Not all of them, just a few. The rest he left untouched. He'd make a slow loop through the rows, stop at one particular tomb, light a candle, and stand there for minutes unmoving. It became sort of a routine soundscape. My kettle whistling, tram bells in the distance, and the faint click of his lighter from across the street. One of my friends, Jakub, joked that I should sketch him for my architectural drawing project. So one evening I did. I sat by the window and drew his silhouette against the twilight. But when I finished and looked back and he was gone. The next morning I walked through the cemetery on my way to the university. The gate was unlocked, but there was no sign of the watchman. His shack door was open though, and inside were shelves of half-burned candles, an old radio, and a small cot. On the table sat a cup of tea, cold, untouched, and a photograph of a woman's grave. The nameplate was too faded to read. That night the candle was still burning. At first I thought maybe someone else, another caretaker, was keeping up his tradition. But the light didn't flicker. Even in the wind, the flame stayed tall and steady like a gas jet. And the strangest part? The wax never melted. It just burned night after night. Jakub came over a few days later. When I pointed out the grave, he laughed. "You're seeing things," he said. But when I dragged him to the window and made him look, his smirk disappeared. The candle was there just like I said. He swore he'd prove it was just some trick, maybe a hidden bulb or a prank. So the next night he climbed over the fence after dark. I stayed inside, watching from my window. He reached the tomb, crouched down and waved up at me before leaning in to examine the flame. And then he froze, not like someone startled, more like his whole body just stopped working. His flashlight rolled out of his hand, its beam cutting across the grass. He didn't move. After what felt like a full minute, he suddenly stumbled backward and sprinted out, vaulting the fence like it was nothing. When he burst into my flat, his face was pale and wet with sweat. There's something under it," he stammered. I saw a face. Under the glass. Like someone looking up through the stone. He refused to talk about it again after that. He even changed routes to avoid my street. A week later, the newspapers ran a small article. Local caretaker found dead in Vyšehrad Cemetery. They said the man had been missing for several days. The body was found near a grave that matched the one with the candle. Cause of death, heart failure. The police photo, the one printed in the paper, showed a candle sitting perfectly upright on the tombstone. Still burning. I moved out shortly after. But every year, on All Souls Night, November 2nd, people still say the same thing. A single flame appears atop that same tomb. It doesn't melt. It doesn't flicker. It doesn't go out. Locals call it the watchman's candle. And if you stay long enough, they say you can see a shadow kneel beside it, lighting another that will never die. I've worked as a caretaker for St. Bridget's Cemetery in Dublin for over 12 years now. It's a small old place tucked behind rows of Georgian houses, barely noticed by tourists. Most of the graves date back to the 1800s, weather-worn and leaning, the kind of place where ivy and time have done more shaping than any gardener could. It's quiet work. I open the main gate in the morning, clean headstones, trim the hedges, sometimes help a grieving family find a name carved into a stone nearly 2 centuries ago. Then I lock up before dark. Always before dark, that's the rule. But there's something that's been happening here for decades, maybe longer. The 3 knocks. It's said that after midnight, if you're anywhere near the old iron gate at the front of the cemetery, you'll hear 3 distinct knocks. Not 2, not 4, always 3. Then silence. The story goes back to the 1950s when the previous caretaker, Patrick Keegan, Heard it one winter night while staying late to fix a lantern. He thought it was a drunk, maybe someone trying to get in, but when he opened the gate, no one was there. He laughed it off until it happened again the next night. And again the next. People said Patrick eventually stopped laughing. He quit without notice and no one saw him again. I didn't believe the story when I started. The older caretaker, Maura, told me about it during my first week. "If you ever hear 3 knocks, don't answer," she said, half joking, half serious. "It's better to pretend you didn't hear." I laughed too. Back then I thought it was just part of the folklore that came with old jobs and older cemeteries. It wasn't until last winter that I started taking it seriously. A few of us were on the night shift. Me, Liam, the groundskeeper, and Fiona, the office clerk. There'd been a string of vandalism incidents lately, so the city asked us to monitor overnight a few times a week. We set up in the small stone office at the back of the property. No lights in the cemetery, just the faint yellow glow from our windows spilling onto the fog. Around midnight, Fiona was half asleep over the logbook, and Liam was making tea on the little stove. I was checking the security cameras, grainy black and white feeds showing empty paths and crosses. Then, clear as day, came 3 metallic knocks. Clang, clang, clang. We all froze. It came from the front gate. No mistaking it. Liam looked at me wide-eyed. That was it, wasn't it? I didn't say anything, just stared at the monitors. Nothing moved. Not a single flicker. We went out together, flashlights cutting through the mist. The air felt colder near the entrance. That damp, heavy cold that seems to cling to your skin. When we reached the gate, it was still locked. The padlock and chain were untouched, not a mark on them. Fiona whispered, "Who would knock and leave?" No one answered. We did a sweep of the perimeter. Nothing but the wind and the occasional distant sound of a car. We went back inside trying to shake it off, but that night none of us really slept. It happened again 2 nights later. Same time, same sound. 3 sharp, deliberate knocks. This time, Liam swore he saw movement beyond the gate. A shadow, maybe. Something standing just outside the streetlight's reach. He ran to open the door, but by the time we stepped outside, there was no one there. The next morning, the grounds by the gate were covered in frost except for 3 faint prints, like someone had stood barefoot in the cold earth. After that, Fiona refused to stay past 11 p.m. She transferred to the daytime office shift. Liam lasted a few more weeks before quitting altogether. That left me. A month went by without incident, and I convinced myself it was over. Then one night in March, I stayed late alone to finish a report. The fog was so thick it felt like the cemetery was floating in it, completely cut off from the city. I kept the heater on, trying to ignore the creaks and groans of the old building. Sometime around 12:15, I heard it again. Clang, clang, clang. It was louder this time, closer. The sound didn't come from the gate. It came from the office door. The iron door that led out to the yard. I froze, hand halfway to my radio. My breath came out in pale puffs. For a long moment, I just stared at the door, half expecting it to swing open. Then the silence returned. I forced myself to check the cameras. The gate was empty. Every path empty. But the feed for camera 3, the one that faced the office wing, was static. It had never done that before. I sat there, trying to decide what to do, when I heard a faint metallic dragging sound from outside, like chains being pulled slowly across stone. Then in the static I saw something flicker. For half a second the camera caught a figure standing by the door. It wasn't clear, just an outline. A person in what looked like a long coat, maybe older clothing. And their head? It hung slightly to one side, like the neck couldn't hold it up. The feed cut out again. I didn't move until dawn. When I finally opened the door, the ground outside was wet with dew, except for 3 spots where the dirt was dry. 3 perfect circles, like someone had been standing there all night. After that, I tried to find an explanation. I even checked the old caretaker logs, boxes of yellowed papers stacked in a storage room. Most were dull, equipment lists, burial dates, weather notes. But tucked near the bottom of one box was a short handwritten entry from 1961. He came again tonight. 3 knocks. I won't answer. I won't let him in. No name, no date. Just that. A few pages later, there was another line. Patrick was right. The gate isn't meant to open after midnight. I don't tell this story to anyone anymore. The city still owns the place, but we only do daytime work now. The office closes before dusk, no exceptions. Sometimes, though, I walk home past the cemetery just to make sure the lock's still on the gate. And every now and then, not often, but enough to keep me from sleeping easy, I'll see the iron bars shudder slightly like someone's on the other side, waiting. And when the wind dies down, if I stop and listen closely enough, clank, 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 always 3, never more. I'm not going to pretend this is some wild cinematic story. It's mostly quiet corridors, a logbook, and a man with a polite way of speaking. If you've ever worked nights in a big building, you know what I mean. It's the small things that get under your skin. The humming of a lift that shouldn't be moving. A light that refuses to stay off. That feeling of being the only warm thing in a place that would rather be empty. It was the facilities coordinator for a converted linen mill on the edge of Belfast's Cathedral Quarter. Red brick, narrow windows, the kind of stairwells that keep the cold even in July. 10 floors, mostly small tech companies and a few charities, with a co-working space on the second floor that was trying very hard to look Scandinavian. The place had a name that sounded expensive, but the bones were old. You could smell that old building smell when it rained, wet brick and dust. We had a day caretaker, Jerry, a big fella who'd been there since before the renovation, and a rotating pair of night caretakers who covered the 7 p.m. to 7 a.m. shift for lockups, plant checks, and responding to alarm resets. The week this happened, one of the night caretakers had gone on short notice leave. HR told me a temp agency would send a replacement for a few nights. Fine. Happens all the time. I printed the induction sheet, laid out the keys and the radio, and left a sticky note. Welcome, call me if you need anything. Mark, Facilities. The first night of the replacement, I stayed until just after 9. I wanted to be there when the cleaner finished the 4th floor. Deirdre, who's been everywhere and seen everything, always leaves by the back stairs to dodge the rain, and she likes someone to walk down with because of a weird smell in the basement. She says it's wet mouse, I say it's old pipes. Either way, I don't mind seeing her out. Around 7:10 p.m., I was in the lobby putting the last parcel into the tenant cupboard when a man came in through the front, shook his umbrella, and gave me this kind smile like he was trying not to drip on the floor. Late 50s maybe. Trim, neat beard, hair more gray than black, old navy raincoat that had seen a lot of weather. He carried a small thermos and a folded high-vis vest. There are 2 kinds of night guys. Young ones who walk too hard to fill the silence, and older ones who talk soft. He was the second kind. Evening, he said. I'm on for the night. Temp through McBride's. His accent was Belfast, east side somewhere, soft and clean. Grand, I said. You're the replacement. I'm Mark. He nodded like we'd already met. I gave him the tour. Ground floor fire panel, lift overrides, first aid box where we keep the mop heads that never get used. He signed the logbook without me asking. Name, Daniel Cairns. Clean handwriting, old school C in Cairns. He listened the way good night staff listen. Eyes on the thing, not on me, questions short and practical. We did the plant room last. If you don't know, a plant room in a converted mill is a low concrete chamber where all the pipes make their racket. Ours was down 1 level under the back stairs. You needed the black key with the brass tag to open the metal door. It always smelled vaguely like rust and laundry, and you had to duck one particular beam even if you were short. He didn't need telling. He ducked it without looking. You've worked in mills before? I asked, more to make conversation than anything. He tilted his head. He said with that non-committal sound people make when the past isn't big news. You keep the main feed at 9? He pointed to a dial I didn't remember pointing out. I looked. The needle sat right where he said. Yeah, I said. He nodded. Good. At 9, Deirdre waved me from the lift and we walked down the back stairs together. She gave the man a quick look and a "How are you?" the way Belfast people do when they recognize a type. He gave her a well enough, which is code for grand. Don't ask. I left by the side door and drove home to Finagi, thought about the new radiator in our hallway and how it never got properly warm, and went to bed to the sound of rain tapping at the gutter. The next morning, I came in at 8:30. The logbook had tidy ticks on the hour, 20, 21, or 22, all the way through to 06 Gower. All well, He'd written on each line like a doctor doing rounds. The keys were back on their hook, radio docked, battery still at 3 bars. I sat at my desk. Jerry came in, shook his newspaper and said, "So how's your man?" I said grand, neat, quiet. We both like quiet. Day 2, same routine. I stayed until a little after 8 to hand off a courier. At 7:05, the man came in, umbrella, thermos, the nod. "Evening," he said. He didn't seem surprised to see me. We didn't do another tour. He didn't need one. At one point around 8, 2 lads from the second-floor co-working space came down, tipsy and loud, a bit dramatic about a ghost in the phone booth, as if glass boxes are healthier after midnight. The man stood beside the reception desk, not behind it, and waited with a patience you can only learn from nights. When they finished their story, he said, "I'll have a look," and the way he said it made them act like adults again. They left. He went up and probably found a hat on the floor or a printout moving in the air from the window latch. The phone booth light stopped flickering after that. He didn't say how. Day 3 was when the first odd thing happened. HR rang me just after lunch. "Is your temp okay?" Siobhan asked. "McBride said they didn't get anyone out to you until tomorrow." We had a mix-up on the start date. I stared at the logbook open on my desk. "We've had someone," I said. "We've had him 2 nights. Name's Daniel Cairns. Who hired him?" she said, annoyed in the way HR gets annoyed when you move a chair without filling out a form. "You did," I said. "Or McBride's." He signed in, did the checks. "Everything's fine." There was a pause. I could hear her scrolling. She was always scrolling. "We don't have a Daniel Cairns on any list," she said. "Are you sure that's his name?" "It's written here," I said. He signed. "He's quiet, older, knows his way around a plant room." Chauvin went quiet again. "All right," she said in that tone that means not all right. "I'll ring McBride's. Don't let him leave until we've sorted it tonight." I hung up and looked at the signature. The pen pressure on the C of Cairns was heavier than the rest, like muscle memory pressing down. It didn't feel like a forged thing. It felt like how my dad wrote numbers on envelopes, confident, neat, from a time when you learned to write like a person. I decided not to say anything to the man when he came in. There's a kind way to ask, "Who are you really?" And I wasn't finding it at 6:30 on a Tuesday. He arrived the same as before. Umbrella, thermos, nod, signed in and put on the high-vis with that resigned gesture people use to appease health and safety. At 7:20, when I brought him a mug of tea, he was looking at the framed photo on the lobby wall. It's the before and after of the building. Ruins in 2004, shiny co-working in 2017. He had his glasses on the end of his nose. "You were here before?" I asked, testing. He didn't look at me. "On and off," he said. "Long time ago. There were windows missing then. Pigeons everywhere. They used to get into the lift shaft and die on the cables." "That sounds about right," I said. "What did you do?" He glanced at me like he'd misheard, then took off his glasses and put them in his pocket. "Same as now," he said. "Night. Were you with a contractor?" I asked. "Aye," he said, which in Belfast can mean anything from yes to leave it. I wanted to keep him there until Siobhan arrived, but HR doesn't show up for anything at night unless a pipe actually bursts. And I am not security. I'm a man with spreadsheets who knows where the salt grid is. I didn't want to be the reason the building ran short-handed either. So I said nothing. Around 9, the alarm on the 5th floor flashed a fault. Smoke detector in the old boardroom. It does that every so often when someone burns toast. But the building was empty. The man took the radio, said, "I'm away up," and moved at a tidy pace, not in a rush. The lift stopped at 5. I watched the little green LED shape on the panel. After 2 minutes, the fault light went off. He didn't radio back. He didn't call down. He just came back down 6 minutes later and nodded once. "Sorted?" I asked. "What was it?" "Window didn't catch," he said. "Latches on these old ones are tricky." He wasn't wrong. Half the catches don't quite meet. You have to lift and push at the same time. Still, it bothered me that he knew which window to check from a silent panel fault and a floor number. I told myself he was experienced. The plant room thing. The way some people can smell a burnt relay through concrete. At 10, I left. I shouldn't have, maybe, but I did. I lived 20 minutes away. My wife had a class early and I said I'd be up with the baby if he stirred. He didn't. At 2 a.m., my phone buzzed on the bedside table, face down. I didn't hear it. It buzzed again at 2:03 and again at 2:06. I slept through the lot. There were 3 missed calls from the building when I woke at 6:12 a.m. One came from the reception phone, one from the back office, one from an unknown number with a Belfast code. No voicemails. I drove in with that hollow feeling that comes when a thing is wrong but unspecified. The building was fine. Lights off where they should be off. The back door locked. The logbook had the hourly ticks right up to 04 Yoero. Then nothing. Keys on the hook. Radio docked. The high-vis folded over the back of the chair. The umbrella leaned against the table, still wet. Jerry came in at 7:10, whistled one note off key, and stopped when he saw my face. "What?" "I had 3 missed calls in the night," I said. He didn't write anything after 4. Jerry went to the panel, looked at the event log. No alarms. He held the radio up to his ear as if there'd be a message in it. "Maybe he nipped out," he said, but his voice had that forced lightness you use when a dog isn't answering to its name. Chauvin came in at 9 with a face like a stapler. "McBride says they still didn't send anyone," she said without hello. "Also, they don't have a Daniel Cairns registered in the last 12 years. I asked them to check back further out of curiosity. Nothing. Did you photocopy his ID?" "We don't ID the night caretakers," I said. "We've never ID'd the night caretakers. We barely ID the couriers." She gave me a look that said, "We will now." "Describe him," she said. And I did. She kept her expression even, but she wrote it down too carefully, like she was going to show it to someone later. She asked to see the CCTV. We sat in the back office watching the previous night's feed. Lobby camera. Me leaving at 21:58, waving a little like a man who believes he's finished. The camera by the lift showed him getting in at 22:03, looking at the ceiling as if thinking, which is a weird habit I have too. 5th floor corridor camera. He stepped out at 22:05, went right, disappeared into the corner where the boardroom door sits. Corridor empty for 1 minute. He came back, hands in his pockets, and got in the lift. Then hours of nothing much. He did the rounds at midnight, 1, 2. At 2:12, the corridor camera on floor 3 flickered. There was a glitch you could chalk up to old wiring, static that smears the image for half a second. Right at the smear, a shadow seemed too thick, like it kept its shape. If you watch CCTV long enough, you see faces in everything. I decided not to mention it. At 4:01, the lobby camera caught him walking to the front doors. He stood with his back to us for 7 seconds. Then he touched the glass with his fingertips. That was it. He turned, signed the logbook, and moved out of frame into the lift lobby. He didn't come back. The camera on the back stairs had motion at 4:06, a single frame of a high-vis shoulder around the corner. The next motion after that was me at 6:48, opening the front door. "Where did he go?" Chauvin said to the screen, which is a very HR question to ask a piece of glass. "We've only the one exit," I said. "Unless he slept in a cupboard. Check them," she said. And we did the thing where 2 adults open every cupboard like they're looking for a schoolboy. Nothing. We checked the plant room. We checked the bin store. We even checked the cabinets that nobody opens because they contain exactly 3 packs of Blue Roll and 2 ants. Around noon, the charity on floor 10 called to say their storage cage had been left open. Not emptied, just open. I took the lift up. The cage is wire mesh with a cheap padlock. The lock was on the floor, not broken, just set down. Inside, on the top of a stack of archive boxes, someone had placed a ring of 3 keys on a brass tag. The tag said Boiler Room 2 in old punched letters. The brass had 2 decades of skin oil on it. I don't know if you've ever picked up something that's warm when it shouldn't be, but I did not touch those keys. I phoned Jerry from the 5th floor corridor and said, "Tell me we have a Boiler Room 2. "We have 1 boiler room," he said, "and you know where it is." "There's a tag here," I said. He came up. Jerry doesn't move fast unless there's bacon involved, but he took the stairs. He looked at the tag, rubbed his thumb on the letters. "We had 2, he said eventually. "Before the renovation." "Before my time," I said. "Before your time," he agreed. We brought the keys down and put them in a zip bag like evidence because apparently that's what we do now. I put the bag on my desk and felt stupid. Shaban said we should call the police in a non-emergency way, which meant a young constable with kind eyes came to ask us if anything was stolen. Nothing was. So he worked a full night shift and then left, she said. We said yes. She said sometimes people just leave. We said yes again. She left. That should be the end of it. A man did a job and moved on. Maybe he used the wrong agency name. Maybe we misheard his surname. But two things kept chewing at me. One, the keys. The only way to get to the charity's storage cage is with the master key that lives on our ring. The ring was where it should be all night. We could see it hanging on the hook on the CCTV whenever the office door was in shot. 2, the calls at 2 a.m. The missed calls were from the building's 2 landlines and an unknown number ending in 3636. We traced that last one. It belongs to a public payphone in a shelter on North Street, 2 minutes walk from our door. I went out at lunch and stood by it like an idiot. It still takes coins. Someone had left a folded bus ticket wedged into the corner of the frame with a thumb. It had one word on it, written in the same tidy, old-fashioned hand. Window. That night, I didn't go home at 9. I told my wife I had to stay, and I meant it. I made a pot of tea at 6:45 and sat at reception with the radio on the desk. At 7:04 on the dot, a man came in, shook his umbrella, smiled the same kind smile and said, "Evening." He wore the same navy raincoat. He signed the logbook. Daniel Cairns. The C pressed down hard, I said lightly. "We had a bit of confusion about your agency." "Aye," he said. "That happens. And about your start date." "Aye. And about you." He looked up. His eyes were the color of the lagan in winter, not blue, not gray, something in between that doesn't reflect anything. "I'm here," he said after a second. Not "I exist," not "here's my ID," just that. Then, "Something's wrong with your windows." "In general," I said, "because the worst kind of fear makes fools." "On 5, he said. "Boardroom." I went with him. It felt important that I go, I don't know why. The 5th floor boardroom is a long rectangle with a big table and one wall of original windows, the skinny kind that pivot in the middle. They whistle sometimes if the wind hits right. It wasn't windy. The air in there was wrong anyway, heavier than the corridor. He walked to the second window from the end and pressed the latch up. The catch floated free, as if it had been unlatched from the outside, which should be impossible. He closed it gently. The sound it made was soft and final, like a book being shut. "There," he said. "How did—" I started. He raised a hand. No sense asking. We went back down. On 3, he stopped in the stairwell and leaned his ear to the wall. He did not look like a man play-acting. He looked like a man who'd been listening to walls his whole life. "Hear that?" he said. I did. A thin, almost polite tapping, like fingernails on a radiator. Counted in 3. Tap, 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 pause. Tap, 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 it seemed to come from inside the wall but would shift if you moved your head. "Pipe expansion?" I said. He smiled. "You don't get pipes at this hour." "Pipes are always at this hour," I said, and he laughed properly then, which made me like him even while not knowing what he was. The rest of the night was ordinary in that way nights can be. He did rounds. He wrote all well in the log. Around 1, I made him toast from the staff bread and he said, "Thank you," like toast had not been made for him in years. At 2:02 the lobby phone rang. I picked it up, heart going like a thing that wants out. It was the building's own number calling itself. I answered and got the empty line sound you can mistake for breathing if you're giddy. I said hello 3 times. The line clicked and went dead. "How often does that happen?" I asked the man. He looked at the handset like it was eccentric. "Every building rings itself if you let it," he said. "It's lonely." At 3:40 the fire panel beeped. No fault indicated, just a single cheerful beep like it wanted attention. He ignored it the way you ignore a cat when you're teaching it to stop pushing the glass off the shelf. But at 3:58 it did it again. Then at 4 a little light flashed. "Plant room. Access." That light only goes when the door under the back stairs opens. Neither of us had opened it. The lobby camera, when I checked the live feed, showed a dark doorway and nothing else. He said, "Stay here." I said, "Not a chance." We went down together. The key turned like it always turned. The beam under the lintel made me duck. He did not duck this time. He flicked the switch for the strip lights. They hummed and took longer than they should to warm. The room smelled like it always does. He stepped in 2 paces and stopped. The far wall, the one with the kill switch we never touch, had water on it. Not a flood, not a gush. Just a slowly growing dark stain like breath on glass but on concrete. It made no sense. He looked at it with a kind of wary sympathy. "Did you notice this earlier?" I asked. He shook his head. He set down the thermos on the step. It made a careful, hollow sound. He took the keys out of his pocket. Not the master ring, which sat where it should upstairs, but a small ring with 3 keys and a brass tag. The tag said Boiler Room 2. He turned to me and, as calmly as if asking for a mop, said, "You'll want to open the other door now." "What other door?" I said, my voice too high. I knew the floor plan in my bones. "There is one door." He walked to the wall with the stain. He set his palm against it. It looked normal. It felt not normal. Cold like hill water. He watched me choose whether to be stupid or go with it. "There used to be 2, he said. "They boxed the other in. People do that. They think you can cover the mouth and the breath will stop. It doesn't." "What is this?" I asked. "Tell me straight." He rubbed his thumb on the brass tag and then did something so small I almost missed it. He put the keys on the concrete floor and nudged them beside my boot with his toe, like a man who's making sure a dog sees where the treat is. "You're the caretaker now," he said softly. I started to say no. "No, I'm not. I answer emails." But the words didn't arrive. The strip lights flickered then like someone somewhere said the wrong name. The tapping we'd heard upstairs came through the wall. Closer now, not fingernails on radiators, but as if something metallic was settling into place. 3 taps, pause, 3 taps. It wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. He stepped back, hands loose at his sides. "I'll show you," he said. And I believed him with a kind of relief I don't like thinking about. He put his shoulder to the wall beside the stain and pressed. The stain darkened, widened as if water soaked into the shape of a doorframe. A seam appeared where there hadn't been one. The concrete smelled colder, older. For a second I saw not our room but a similar room, older by decades, with wooden duckboards on the floor and a cork notice board with yellowed paper. For that second, the room had 2 doors and the old one was the one that mattered. Then the lights went to half. Not off, just less. The man looked at me without alarm and said, like a supervisor gently telling you there's a form you forgot. When you open it, you don't look in first. You listen. You ask, "Are we all right?" If nothing answers, you ask again. If it answers, you close it. You don't argue. "Who are you?" I asked. It came out like a plea. He considered. "I'm who they think of when the floor doesn't sit right," he said. "I come when there's a gap." "HR says they didn't hire you," I said, "because people say stupid things when they're scared." He smiled. It made him look terribly tired. "Aye," he said. "They didn't." Something on the other side of that dark seam tapped once, then twice, then once again, like it was trying to get the rhythm we had. It didn't manage it. It sounded annoyed. The man took a breath through his teeth like at a stubborn bolt. "We'll make the check and then I'll go," he said to me. "You've the way of the place now." The radio on my belt crackled. Just once, the way radios do when someone thinks about pressing the button. It didn't speak. The sound in the wall changed. Not tapping. Something lighter. Imagine pebbles in the hem of a curtain being shaken out. Imagine a handful of screws rolled on a metal tray. It stopped as quickly as it started. He put his hand on the knot door. "Are we all right?" He asked, not loud, not brave. He said it exactly as you might ask a colleague behind a filing cabinet if they were stuck. He waited. He nodded as if someone spoke very softly. He said it again. Then he stepped back. The lights returned to full without phasing up. The stain was smaller, drying. The seam was a crack in a normal wall. He looked suddenly older, like the edges of him were tired. He picked up the thermos, screwed the cup back on. He walked past me and put his hand on my shoulder. Warm. Real. "You'll keep the windows caught," he said. "You'll answer when it rings. The place remembers who care for it." "I don't want to," I started. And then he was gone out the door up the back stairs, and the radio on my belt crackled one more polite crackle that could have been a thank you. I went after him. I don't know why. I lost him between the third and fourth landings. The lobby camera later showed him not at all. He hadn't passed it. The front door had not opened. The back had not moved. The building ate the man the way buildings eat drafts and stories. You know they're there. You can feel them. You don't get to keep them. At 6 a.m., I wrote all well in the logbook because I didn't know what else. At 6:07, I signed my name under his. My pen pressed too hard on the M of Mark. At 6:20, Deirdre came in early, saw my face, and said nothing. She cleaned the third-floor kitchen and came back down with a roll of blue bags. As she left, she touched the brass tag on my desk without looking at it and said, "I thought you'd always end up nights." HR called at 9 to say McBride's could send someone that evening. I told them not to. Siobhan said, "We can't have you covering nights," and I said, "I'm not. I'm just here." She didn't like that. She asked about the man again, her voice softer, as if she wanted a normal answer and would take any one I gave. I told her everything I've written here except the part about the wall. She looked at me like I was grieving someone I'd never actually known, which is accurate. There's a photo in a maintenance binder we found later, one that got missed when the archivists did their big tidy years back. It's from 1998, taken with a flash that made everyone look too alive. In it, a group of men stand in the old plant room with their arms crossed. The caption in biro says, "Night Crew, East." Third from the left is a man with a neat beard and a navy raincoat. Under the list of names, someone has added in pencil, lighter and more careful than the rest. Cairns, R.I.P. No first name. No date. We didn't put the binder back. We didn't add anything. We left it in the drawer under the logbook where people leave odd things because there's no rule about them. The boiler room 2 key still sits in a zip bag on my desk, though I don't know why I bother bagging it. Every couple of nights, the lobby phone rings itself at 2 a.m., and someone breathes nicely on the other end for a second and a half, which is exactly how long it takes to hear someone decide to hang up. On wet nights, if you stand quietly in the old boardroom, you can hear the windows try to lift, but they don't, because I catch them. The 5th floor smells like rain on brick. It's not unpleasant. A week after he vanished, the logbook page with his 3 nights of all well swelled a little at the corner like it had been damp and dried. The signature didn't fade. The C of Cairns looked as if it had been pressed yesterday. HR asked me for a photocopy and I made one, and the C didn't come out right. It was fainter than the rest, like the machine didn't know how to weigh it. If you're reading this and you work nights, you'll either laugh or you'll understand. Buildings get used to people. You change the way you walk to fit their stairs. You learn exactly how hard to push a door so it won't crash against the stop. You see things you don't write down because writing them down makes them stupid. But I'm writing this down because that man signed in, worked a shift and went. HR never hired him. We could all agree on that part. The rest is unhelpful to put in a report. It's nearly 2 a.m. now. The desk lamp throws a circle on the logbook. The phone has rung once already and done its little empty sound. The rain is doing the careful, quiet rain that makes the city gentler. I've checked the 5th floor windows, and the latch on the 2nd one from the end is a touch loose again, so I've wedged a coin into the catch like my father would have done, and that should hold until we get a joiner out. I could leave. I don't. Not because I'm brave or paid for it, but because if someone taps on the wrong side of a wall, there should be a person here to hear it and say the silly human thing you say to rooms. Are we all right? Sometimes it answers. Sometimes you have to ask again. And if a man in a navy raincoat walks in at 7 and signs the book with a strong C, I will show him the plant room and I will not ask him for ID, because I don't think that's what this place wants from me. I think it wants me to keep the keys where they belong and the windows caught and the door that isn't a door left politely shut unless the building asks. That's the job. That's the only part anyone ever writes down. If you're in Belfast, and you pass a red brick mill after midnight and the lights seem too steady for an empty place, that's us. If you call the number on the glass and it rings and rings at 2 in the morning, I might answer and I might not. It depends on whether I'm listening to the wall. If I don't answer, don't worry. All well. I'm writing this because I don't want to be the only person who saw it and kept quiet. If you're from Budapest, you probably know the cemetery on Fiume Út, the big one with the heroes' mausoleums and the long stone avenues where every step echoes. I work nights as a contractor for the security company that watches the municipal properties. The kind of job you take when your sleep schedule is already ruined and you don't want to talk to anyone after 6 p.m. I'm not a believer in anything, really. I'm the guy who checks if the gate is locked and whether the raccoons are actually cats. I watch cameras and log incidents and drink the same vending machine coffee at 2 a.m. For 3 months last winter, I was assigned to the cemetery specifically because they were renovating the outer wall and the administration building. Work meant a closed site. No visitors after 5, no exceptions. We had razor wire on top of the temporary fence behind the iron gate and a chain you could lift a car with. The site manager, a big man named Lajos, who wore his hard hat even inside. The office had a key we called the piano. It was that long and that heavy. If the gate wasn't locked with that key, it wasn't locked. We had a little control room the city set up inside a portable office container by the main entrance on Fiume. It smelled like drywall dust and the cold metal of coins. 4 monitors showed the grounds from 16 cameras, alleys, a few open plots, the main memorials, and the chapel. 2 cameras looked back toward the gate, one wide, one tight on the lock. The system wasn't fancy. Half of it was old analog stuff with balance, and you could see the picture swim if someone turned on a leaf blower next door. You don't get ghosts on that kind of equipment. You get static and spiders walking across lenses, that's it. There were 3 of us on the night shift most weeks. Me, a young woman named Rebecca, who was doing this gig between nursing school semesters, and an older guy, Andor, who had been in private security since before I was born. He'd tell stories about guarding music festivals in Obuda in the 90s, the kind of stories where everyone's name is a guy I knew. The 3 of us weren't close, but when you spend 6 hours staring at quiet, you talk. We played Identify the Stray, where we'd name the cat families that lived somewhere in the hedges. We watched the trams slide past on the street cams and timed how long line 24 took to show up when the headway said 8 minutes, and it was always 12. The first time we saw the candles was late February, the evening after a snow that never quite fell, just hung in the air like dust. The gate had been closed at 5 and Lajos had locked it himself. I watched him do it because I was outside with a broom, pushing the slush away from the threshold so it wouldn't freeze. He turned the key, and the bar slid with a sound that vibrated in my jaw. Rebecca signed the lock-off in the log, 1706. At 21:40, Rebecca leaned in toward the bottom left monitor and said, "Were there candles set out on 27A this morning?" She had that careful nurse tone already, even as a student, noticing small things the rest of us missed. I looked, then tapped the glass because the picture always felt like it would sharpen if you treated it like a fish tank. Camera 8 looked down the length of Avenue 27A, the one lined with those blackened bronze busts and low stone fences. About 2/3 of the way down, there was a soft gold shimmer, little points of light like the flutter of tea candles moving in a breeze. "No," I said. "No events scheduled this week, and all the lanterns were taken in for the renovation. Remember the checklist?" I was sure of it because I'd helped carry the boxes of little glass jars into storage 3 days earlier. Lajos had made us label everything. I had written A27 lanterns in marker on one. Andor pulled himself closer to the screen. He'd been doing the crossword with his reading glasses on, pushing them up his forehead when he looked at the cameras. "Probably kids," he said, jumping the back fence. We clicked through the angles. 8 showed the lights the most clearly, but you could catch the same yellow beading on cameras 5 and 11 from different paths. It wasn't a flashlight pattern. It wasn't a phone screen. It was the small, uneven wobble of open flame. I took the walkie and the big, cold flashlight we called the brick and said I'd go see. When you go out alone in that place at night, there is always a feeling like you're interrupting something you can't name. But it's just stone and trees in your breath. I crossed the gravel with the light down so I wouldn't blind the cameras. The air had that iron taste you get before snow does finally decide to be snow. The gate was locked behind me. I checked. The chain just because I could. It was pulled tight as a guitar string. Nothing moved on Fiume except a bus streaking orange down the far lane. Inside the cemetery was a deeper dark than the street. You know how cities glow even at midnight? This was the opposite. The trees are tall and close there, and they swallow the street lamps. I turned right and right again, counting intersections. My boots scuffed bits of gravel. Somewhere a little bell rang twice, maybe on a cat's collar, maybe a piece of metal easing in the cold. I reached Avenue 27A and saw the light with my own eyes, not on a screen. It wasn't one candle. It was 10 or 12 set along the low wall of a family plot, the way memorial candles are left after All Saints. They were new. The glass was clear, unsooted. The flames trembled. I felt that ridiculous relief of having a normal explanation. Someone had slipped in to remember someone and we'd missed them, or a worker forgot to take these in. I radioed back. There really are candles on 27A. Looks like the Farkas plot. Did anyone leave them after the afternoon? Rebecca's voice came back with static under it. No entries. I'm checking the clip from 5 to 7. No one went through the gate. Back fence, I said, but I didn't believe it. The back fence was high and there were motion sensors there more sensitive than a cat's whisker. If a person had come that way, we would have heard a chime and cursed the way we always did when a fox took a shortcut. I angled the brick down into the glass of one of the candles and saw something that made my stomach settle, like it was getting ready to fall. My own eye, warped and stretched by the roundness of the glass, reflected in the candle flame. That part isn't strange. Glass reflects. But there was another shape next to mine. Not behind me, next to me where no one stood. For a second I told myself it was the stone bust's nose refracting, or a shadow. Then it moved. Not like a shadow in wind, like a face turning to find a better angle. My first instinct was stupid and ordinary. I spun around with the light raised like a club and said, "Hello?" My own voice came back from the trees, small, a question even I didn't answer. There was no one there. I pointed the light back into the glass and the face was still there. But now it was looking a little down like it was reading something small and close. It had a dark shape over the brow, something like a hat or a scarf shadow. An older man's face. The crease you get between your eyes when you squint a lot. The kind of soft jaw that comes with age. Not a cartoon. A face with pores and a thin white line on the cheek as if from shaving too quickly. "Andor," I said on the radio, because he liked practical jokes and I wanted it to be his. "If you're out here, you win." Not funny. Static. Then Andor. "I'm in the toilet, my friend. If you're seeing me, the camera has learned to smell." I walked back to the office with my light off because I didn't want to see my own breath-making shapes. Rebecca met me at the door with her cheeks blotched from the heat of the container and her hands in the pockets of her big coat. She had rolled the chair away from the monitors and her eyes were too open in the way you get when you're trying hard not to blink. "I rewound to the lock," she said. "I watched Lajos set it, and then I watched every camera. No one came in. The candles they're just on by 21:37. One frame, nothing. Next frame on, watch, we watched." She had a good eye. She had set a time-lapse of the last hour on 4 squares, 8, 5, 11, and the gate. At 21:36:59 on 8, the plot was dark. At 21:37 where the lights were there, it wasn't a warm-up of exposure. It wasn't a glitch that brightened the picture. The pixels went from dark to gold as cleanly as someone snapping their fingers. And still I thought, a worker placed them at 4:50, unlogged. We didn't jog back far enough. There was a reflection we misread. Whatever excuse would keep the world in the shape it had been when I woke up that day. We made an entry in the log. Unexplained presence of candles. 27A, 21:37, and we kept watching. The flames burned steady in the mild wind. At 22:03, something else happened. Rebecca was the one who saw it first again. She leaned forward, forehead nearly touching the glass of the monitor. "The reflections," she said. "We had zoom on 8, digital, so it degraded into blocks if you pushed it. But even with that, we could see the tiny mirrored worlds in the curved candle glass. Faces. Not all of them. Not always. But in one glass and then another. There were faces like mine had been, like an aquarium version of a person leaning too close. They were not the same face from candle to candle. Some looked into the flame the way you stare at a stove to make sure it's lit. Some were in profile. One had her hair piled on her head like she'd just gotten out of the bath and wrapped it in a towel, which would be absurd, so I told myself it was a hat. They didn't move together like a loop. They weren't a GIF or a stuck frame. They moved with the tiny tempo of breathing people. A blink too slow. The mouth swelling a fraction and easing. A swallow that made the jaw flex. They didn't appear like horror movies with a bang. They were just there, as normal as any reflection, except there was no one to reflect. We stayed with those monitors like moths to their brothers. Andor came back and said, "What the hell," in a flat voice, then said nothing else for a long time. Around midnight, the battery indicator on the wireless keyboard started blinking like it was embarrassed. Someone on Fume shouted something drunken, and that real sound hit the glass of our box and made me jump so hard my tailbone hurt. At 0112, the wind picked up. You could see it in the trees, the way the tops swayed against the bit of sky camera 3 captured. You could see it in the camera's own shake. These were older housings, and they had some play. On 8, the flames went left, right, left. On the reflection, the faces followed, and one of them did something that made Rebecca make a little un-Rebecca sound. It smiled. Not broadly. Not theatrically. It smiled the way someone does when you catch their eye in a doorway and you're glad to see them. I don't want to say it felt personal, because that's what people who want to be haunted always say, but it felt directed. Or that's what I told myself later, which is worse because it means I explained my fear to myself in a way that keeps it alive. We didn't call the police. What would we say? Our cameras reflect people in candles. We didn't call Lajos either. He comes at 7 and I didn't want to be the one who made him turn on his heel at home. We did what our job tells us to do. We recorded. Every 20 minutes I took a clip and saved it to a USB drive. Rebecca wrote the time and the camera number in a note. Andor went outside twice to check the perimeter. He said it that way even though there was no one in sight, and came back a few minutes later each time, face set and careful like it was made of card. The faces stayed until 02:43, that exact minute. We know because we were watching, and also because at 02:43, all the flames went flat and died at once, exactly like the way they'd lit. After that, the glass was only glass. It caught the trees and the sky. It caught nothing we could argue about. We slept badly that day. It felt like sleeping with a pan on the stove you're not sure you turned off. When I woke, it was already dusk. I got a text from Rebecca. I told my cousin, film student, he wants to look at the footage. Is that okay? I said we should show Lajos first. She said, yes. She didn't put a smiley, and she usually would. At 7 the next morning, Lajos stood with his hard hat hung on the back of his chair like a toy helmet and watched the clips with us. He's the kind of guy who can make fun without being cruel. He didn't that morning. He just leaned his forearms on his knees and breathed through his nose and watched. When the face smiled, he rubbed his thumb along the seam of his jeans, like he was trying to smooth it out. When it ended, when the candles died at 02:43, he nodded once like we had shown him exactly the thing we'd said we'd show him, nothing more. Then he said, keep it between us for now. We're closed because of renovation. If someone hears we have people inside, even ghosts are people in the city's mind. There will be a committee. He made a face at the word the way you do when you bite a lemon seed. Lajos believed in concrete and schedules. He did not believe in faces in flames. For 3 nights, nothing happened. No candles, no faces. The cats did cat business. We saw the white one we call Lacey drag a dead something impressive across Avenue 9, and the leaves came down in a way that makes cameras look like they're crying. And then, the next Friday around the same time, 21:37 if you care about numbers, we did now, the candles lit again. Not in the same place. This time it was near the Kossuth mausoleum, the big round one. The glass looked the same, clear, new. The flames behaved the same. The faces returned. We did call someone then, not the police, not because of fear, but because of the pattern. We called the parish priest who sometimes blesses the graves on All Saints, Father Miklos, who has a voice like a bass drum and hands like a carpenter, because that's what he was before the seminary. He came in a black coat that hung on him like a curtain and a knitted cap with a pom-pom that made him look less severe. He stood behind our chairs and watched for 5 minutes and then said almost softly, what? Lajos asked, as if he'd been holding that single syllable behind his teeth like a mint. There's a term, Miklos said. It's older than church words, huffany, foxfire. People say swamp gas, people say mold. The old women say it can be souls when the barrier is thin. Don't roll your eyes, Lajos. And he smiled like he was fond of Lajos and like he expected an eye roll. I have blessed many candles here. I have watched grandsons light one after another. I have not seen this, but I have heard of things like this. Don't chase it. Chase what? I asked. The question came out too loud. I felt like a child in a room where adults were deciding something about me. Meaning, he said. Don't attach meaning too quickly. Don't go out to meet it. Let it do what it does and watch and sleep, and if it harms no one, you've lost nothing. Rebecca asked something then that I had been trying not to form in words. What if the faces are the people they are for? Then it is the kindest haunting I have never been taught to name, he said. And you are lucky, and I am too, to have seen it. We did not chase meaning. For a while. But things, even kind things, have a way of reaching a person where they are weakest, even if they aren't aiming. The fourth time the candles came, near the soldiers' section, low in plain stones, I saw a profile in the glass that I knew. My father's. It wasn't a perfect photograph. It wasn't a magic show. It was more like the way you see someone you love walking a block ahead and know them by their shoulders. A slouch. A tilt of the head he had when he was about to argue and pretend he wasn't going to. My chest went tight in the way that has nothing to do with superstition. He'd been gone 6 years. He is not buried there. I got up without saying anything and went to the door. I was halfway to it when Rebecca said, "Don't," very quietly, and that tone has stopped me from doing stupid things. More than once since. There's something about a nurse asking you not to that. Wraps a gentle restraining hand around your wrist. I'm just going to the gate, I said. I'm not going in. The lock on the gate was a fact. It was steel and a chain and the piano key. I stepped to it and put my hands on the bars, and the metal pulled the heat from me instantly. The street was empty. The office behind me threw that cheap fluorescent light into the little patch between the containers so everything looked the color of paper. I stood there and tried to say something useful like you do when you talk to someone at a grave. For me it was a messy handful of Hungarian, and the pet names we go back to when we don't care if we sound childish. It felt stupid and also like breathing, and then I saw it, the smile in the glass of the candle. The same not broad human smile I'd seen the first night, but this time I believed it belonged to me. It's a trick of the light, Andor said later, trying to be kind like kicking a ball back to you. Your brain wants that. Maybe, I said, because maybe is the room you can stand in. Word got around despite Lajos's wish. These things spread like a smell. The day crew came in early to rewatch Scraps. The electrician said the current must be riding the lines and heating some element in the glass. A woman from admin who did not bring us coffee but who always offered, said her aunt's village had a well that wasn't there until it was, and a neighbor who could find it with a stick. Everyone brought their version of reason to the pile, and none of it changed the facts on the monitor. On the 10th night, when the candles appeared by the chapel, something happened that changed the way I think about doors. Rebecca and I were on shift alone for a few hours because Andor had gone home sick. Food poisoning, he said, or nerves pretending. The faces in the glass were more animated that night, or we told ourselves they were. One man was clearly talking, though you couldn't read lips at that scale. A woman blinked slow and heavy like she was trying not to cry. At 017, the camera on the gate glitched briefly. Just one of those lines rolling up the picture like a shutter closing and opening. When it cleared, the chain was on the ground. We did not hear it fall. We did not hear anything. One frame it was tight as a guitar string. Next it was a heap of links, the way a necklace looks when you drop it and it makes that little snake shape. The key was still in its bracket on the wall hook inside our container. Lajos hadn't come. The gate had not moved in the wind. They're heavy and fussy. You know their sound when they move because everything vibrates. The chain was just not where it had been. I felt heat in my back like I was standing too close to a fire. Rebecca stood up so fast her chair banged the wall and wobbled. She said, "Lock the inner door." And I did because I was glad to do anything that had a verb attached to it. We stood there in the rectangle of our office and listened for footsteps, voices, any human sound. We heard only the same distant city hum and one late tram whine on its curve. After a minute I said, "We have to put it back." My voice sounded like it belonged to a recording. We walked out together with the walkies and the brick flashlight. The chain lay exactly where the camera said it did. The padlock was intact, closed. No scratches looked fresh. The loop of it was the same and the same night made of the same material as everything else. I picked it up and felt each weighted link drag across my palm and held it like a leash, while Rebecca slid the bar closed and I fed the chain back through and snapped the lock shut. It made the same sound as every other time, a small, honest clack. We tested it the way Lajos had taught us, her pulling from the inside, me pushing from the out, the two of us panting like we'd run to each other. When we went back into the office, the candles were out. The faces were gone. The glass showed only what glass should. The gate cam, when rewound, showed the chain lift itself in a smooth, impossible loop as if some careful person held each link and raised it without touching it, then let it drop. It did not fall like drop chain. It unspooled in a way that had intent. I know how insane that sounds. I'm writing it anyway. The city finally sent someone. They didn't tell us we're sending someone to check the hauntings. They sent a technician with a handheld meter and a man from admin with a notebook and a badge on a lanyard who asked questions like, at what intervals? And is it always the same camera? And could a passerby with a laser pointer create this? They left with copies of the clips and promised a report. I am sure there's a report now in a folder with words like anomalous and electrical and unknown. We kept watching. We are still watching. They reopened the cemetery in spring, once the wall was done and the scaffolding came down. People came back and walked with their quiet and their flowers and their bags of pebbles for the Jewish graves. Nothing happened during hours. Nothing special, I mean. Only the everyday grief and the cats sleeping in scooped leaves like bowls. At night sometimes the candles still come. Not every week. Not always at 2137. The faces in the glass are not always the people anyone recognizes. Sometimes they're the kind of face you'd forget on a bus. But once Rebecca saw her grandmother, the towel on the head woman from the first night, and made the sound again and sat down on the edge of the chair like a child getting a shot, bracing against a pain she'd take because it was true and because it would pass. And sometimes the chain falls. Not every night. Not in a pattern we can say is a pattern. We don't open the gate when it does. We put it back. We do it together now, a habit you make because rituals keep your hands from shaking. I have thought about the night we might not be able to lift it because it will be too heavy, or because our fingers won't be strong enough, or because someone will be standing there on the other side, not reflected, waiting. If that night comes, maybe we'll let it be, and sit in our chairs and do nothing brave. People ask me sometimes because I have made the mistake of telling a few too many people what I think it is. And I say the thing that Father Miklo said, because it fits in my mouth and doesn't cut me. Don't chase meaning, but alone. On the tram home past Coletti when the windows make double of the city and you can see yourself looking tired, I do chase it. I think about the faces like reflections that belong to candles, not to people. I think about the way the chain lifts like someone laying a hand on a door because they want it open but they won't force it. I think about how often we lock places where the living want to speak and how sometimes the dead, or what we call the dead because it is easier than the unseen, don't care about our chains, only about whether we are paying attention. Here's the part I haven't told anyone. A week ago I took a short shift for extra pay, 3 hours after midnight. It was quiet enough to hear my own breath and I did the thing I pretend I don't do. I watched the cameras like a person waiting for their bus. At 0212, a single candle lit on 27A, just one. It burned steady. There was no face in it. Not at first. And then as gently as someone deciding to forgive you there was. It wasn't my father this time. It was mine. Not like the first night, not the slipperiness of glass tricking you. It was me looking at me. A half second out of sync the way a delayed stream throws you off. I didn't smile. The face didn't either. We just looked, and that was somehow worse than any grin or nod. Then the chain on the gate didn't fall. Instead, the padlock rotated in the camera frame like a slow clock. A quarter turn, half three-quarters all the way around until the keyhole pointed up, like it was waiting for someone to drop a key into it from the sky. I stood up and put my hand on the inner door and didn't open it. I watched the candle until it went out on its own. The glass showed only the night and the little warped shapes it always holds. I put both hands on the desk and told myself to breathe. I told myself to sit down. I told myself not to chase meaning. I made a note in the log without writing the part about my own face because I am still trying to decide if silence is the same thing as safety. I don't know what the footage will show the next time it happens. I don't know if the report will ever get written in a way that makes anyone sleep better. I only know that when the candles come, the faces come. And when the faces come, something waits by the gate to see if we'll let it in. And I know that every time I go to pick up the chain with Rebecca, I hold it the way you take a hand across a threshold in the dark, as if the one holding the other could be anyone, living or not, friend or not, and that the only decent thing is to grip once gently and then let go. I used to work the early shift at a cemetery on the western edge of Munich. It wasn't my dream job. I was a grad student who needed rent money badly enough to say yes when a friend of a friend told me the cemetery's caretaker had hurt his knee and needed someone to open the gate, sweep the pathways, and handle light grounds work before sunrise. I figured it would be quiet, honest work. I didn't figure it would change how I feel about standing on open ground with nothing in front of me. It started in March, the first year I worked there. The place was one of those old, sprawling cemeteries that looks more like a park than a field of graves. Big beech trees, gravel paths, little hedges trimmed into squares that hold family plots. Locals came through at dawn with dogs on leashes and takeaway coffees, and we tried to keep the place neat enough that joggers weren't dodging old wreath wires. Most days I got there around 5 a.m., checked the shed, rolled the gate open, and made a quick loop to see if a branch had fallen or if foxes had dug near the edges of the wall. The caretaker, my boss, was a man in his 60s named Kraus. He had the kind of face that always looks windburned. His job was to do the heavy lifting after I left for school, but he liked to meet me sometimes if he couldn't sleep. He'd appear with a thermos and a pack of those butter cookies that come in a blue tin. We had a routine. I'd unlock the chapel. He'd complain about teenagers knocking over lanterns, and then he'd tell one or two stories that always ended with "Aber so ist es" and a shrug. On my second week, he asked me to check a small children's section near the far eastern path. "A mother is coming this morning with candles," he said, "and I don't want her to see the mess." There had been a storm, and petals were everywhere. The children's section was tucked behind a yew hedge and felt different from the rest of the grounds. More color, more little toys and laminated photos clipped to vases. There's a humility to those squares of earth that makes you automatically quiet, like you've stepped through an invisible curtain. I cleared twigs and righted a porcelain angel that had tipped into a puddle. That's when I noticed a headstone that didn't line up with the others. The stones were in a tidy row, all facing the same direction, all set into the grass with a border of low boxwood. This one, a small granite marker with a simple engraved star and the name Felix, was turned slightly as if someone had put a shoulder to it and nudged. Not by much, maybe the width of my thumb, but enough that it didn't sit square in its place. I figured a grounds crew had bumped it with a mower, except we used trimmers here, not ride-ons. I tried to push it back with my boot. It didn't budge. When I crouched, I could see a faint line in the grass where the stone had been sitting, a pale rectangle in the dew. The stone had apparently moved forward and a little to the right. The soil around it was flat and smooth. No trenching, no disturbance. I looked for pry marks and didn't see any. I told myself I was being an idiot and moved on. But when I told Kraus about it later, just in the easy way you bring up a detail, one of the stones was a little crooked. Might need a reset. He didn't laugh or brush it off. He took a breath through his teeth the way people do when they're about to lift something heavy and said, "That one." "What one?" I asked. He pulled his cap lower. "Don't worry. Tell me if you see it again." I didn't tell him that was a weird thing to say. I didn't tell him I had already done the math and decided there was no way that little granite block could have shifted without a human hand or a good shove from a machine. The next time I noticed it was exactly a month later. April. The light came earlier, birds were louder, and the air had that damp tiredness that makes everything smell like turning leaves. I walked through with my trash grabber and bucket, past the lamppost I always tapped twice out of habit, and I stopped dead at the children's plot. The stone had moved again, same direction, east, a little south. The engraved star wasn't facing the same way as its neighbors anymore. The name Felix had a slight angle, like the smile on someone who's keeping a secret. This time I knelt and used my phone's level app against the top edge. I don't know what I thought I was going to prove with that, but somehow the number on the screen felt like it made it real. The top of the stone was no longer perpendicular to the border. I looked down at the grass where the stone had been 30 days before. There was a faint, clean outline like a tan line you see when someone takes off a watch. The new footprint was an inch, maybe two, beyond the old. The soil perfectly intact. No heave, no crack. If you've ever reset a stone, you know what disturbed earth looks like. This wasn't that. I checked the maintenance log in the shed. No record of a reset. I asked Lena, the other student who worked weekends, if she had touched it. She shook her head, then frowned. Wait, the small one with the star? When I said yes, she set down her broom and rubbed her thumb and forefinger together, thinking. I thought my eyes were wrong, she said. Like when you think a picture is crooked, but it's the wall. When we told Kraus, he closed the logbook. Let it be, he said. That became the refrain. I'd mention it when I saw him, and he'd nod and tell me to leave it alone. He didn't sound superstitious, not exactly. More like someone who's been bitten by a dog and decides later to just walk around that gate forever. By June, it wasn't subtle anymore. I could measure the shift with a tape, 4.7 centimeters east from where it was in April, another 2.3 south. I made little pencil marks on a laminated map of the section so I wouldn't feel like I was imagining it. The path of movement wasn't straight either. It traced a faint diagonal toward a particular beech tree at the edge of the hedge. The grass around the base stayed smooth, the soil firm. I put my fingers on the stone and pushed. It didn't give. It was planted. The parents came sometimes. A woman in her early 30s with a gray scarf who stood with both hands on the top edge and her forehead resting on them, and a man who kept walking away and coming back, as if he were trying to give his grief little recesses. They didn't seem to notice the drift. Or they did and decided it was in their heads and not worth saying out loud. The man once bent down to straighten a toy car, then left it crooked. I finally asked Kraus for the file. Every plot had one. A manila folder with ownership details, burial date, and anything else that mattered. He gave it to me with a warning about confidentiality and a look that said, take what you need and put it back. Felix Adler, born 2016, died 2021. There was a laminated copy of a small obituary the family had printed. He loved diggers and blue balloons. There was also a note from the stonecutter about the granite block, weight, polish type, engraving font. The base foundation was described as standard depth, standard gravel bed, standard mortar. Nothing unusual. I checked the date of installation. It was July. That would make the first shift in August, months before I ever saw it. That night over beers at my place, I told two friends, Lena and a guy from my program, Jonas, about the moving headstone. I wanted them to laugh so I could call myself stupid and stop thinking about it every morning at 5. They didn't laugh. Jonas asked me if there were tunnels under the cemetery, something to do with drainage, some tiny tectonic thing that would cause a very specific movement. He used words like subsidence and shear. Lena said, the earth isn't pushing. It would push everything. It's like it's being pulled. None of us said by what. July is hard ground. You can walk across a lawn and feel the bounce in spring, the sponge in autumn. In July, you feel the dryness through your soles. I came in one morning and found the headstone a full palm's width, further along its invisible path. The little sun-bleached plastic windmill that someone had stuck in the soil beside it no longer touched the stone. There was now a polite gap. The grass at the old footprint was still lighter than the rest, like the ghost of a rectangle. I put down my bucket and looked around. The cemetery is not loud, but it's not silent either. There's always some distant hum, a bird, a truck, the church bell that's just a little out of tune. I thought about reaching for it with both hands. It felt wrong to touch it. Not for some spiritual reason. I mean wrong the way you don't touch a sleeping dog even if you grew up with dogs. You never know what they'll do if it's not you they wake to. That afternoon I found Kraus in the workshop restringing a trimmer head. We need to reset it, I said. It's going to be noticeable soon. He didn't look up. We've reset it twice. When? Before you came. And it kept moving. He wiped his hands on a rag and finally met my eyes. Let it be. You're not curious, I said and heard the edge in my voice. I am old enough to be tired, he said, which sounded like a joke but wasn't. I started leaving my phone in my chest pocket with the camera app queued up when I did the dawn rounds. Each time I entered the children's section, I'd stop and take a wide shot. A month's worth of those photos looks like a stop-motion animation where only one piece of the puzzle crawls. In each image, the stone is a little closer to the beech tree. In August, the parents noticed. The mother put her hand on the top and then stepped back and frowned. The father circled it. He tracked his boot toe along the grass and saw the old imprint. He looked around the section like he expected to catch someone naked in the act of something wrong. He caught me watching and asked, "Is this normal? Is this normal?" I didn't want to lie to a man whose son's picture was staring up at me from a laminated card, so I told him the truth. "We have never seen this before." He nodded once, very slowly, like someone hearing the thing they didn't want confirmed but expected. They didn't complain to the office. They didn't demand we fix it. They came back the next morning with a tiny wooden cross and pushed it into the soil at the front right corner of the stone, flush with the new edge. A marker. A way to tell if their eyes were tricking them. 2 weeks later, the cross stood clear of the stone by maybe 3 fingers. The mother took it out and moved it again, closer. She didn't look surprised. She looked tired. I tried to reason with it, even though I already knew how that sounded in my own head. There was wind. There was rain. There was a groundhog burrow. There was a teenager with too much time. There was the possibility that the stonecutter used too much sand and not enough cement in the bedding mortar. But even that didn't explain the undisturbed soil. There's a way the earth scabs when you cut it. That look never appeared. The grass around the stone was a small, neat collar, always smooth. If it had been levered up and shifted even a centimeter, I would have seen the seam. There was no seam. In September, I bought a cheap hiking compass and stuck it in my pocket. When I kneeled at the plot and held it flat, the needle quivered and then stayed true. East was east. The direction of the movement matched the compass. I tapped the stone with a knuckle. It gave back a dead, polite thunk. If you think I was going to put my ear to it, you think I'm braver than I am. Lena and I decided to try something that felt absurd even as we planned it. We'd sit up and watch. We picked the last Sunday of September because the forecast said clear, and because there weren't any funerals scheduled for Monday morning, which meant fewer people early, fewer chances to get yelled at for being where we weren't supposed to be. We told Kraus we were inventorying lanterns. He looked at us a few seconds too long and said, "Don't stay on the grass. And don't touch anything." We brought a thermos of coffee and a blanket like we were going to watch fireworks. Then immediately felt stupid because watching a grave move is not a thing people do with a blanket. We sat on the path beyond the hedge with our backs against the beech tree, where we could see into the children's section through a gap. The cemetery at midnight is the same place as at noon, and also it isn't. Distance opens up and then closes in strange places. Your eye misjudges corners. What looks flat at noon looks like shallow bowls and ridges. I heard foxes more than I expected and traffic less. The chapel clock did its little indignant chime every hour, and at 1 it startled me like it hadn't been doing the same thing since 1904. The stone sat there. That's what stones do. At 2:13 a.m., a breeze went through the hedge and the tiny windmill on the grave behind Felix's spun once and then stilled. I told myself to stop giving significance to random moments. Lena poured more coffee and said softly, because it felt wrong to speak normal volume, "Do you feel that?" I didn't feel anything, and then I did. It wasn't a sound so much as the memory of one, like when you walk into a room that's just had a power outage and your ears notice the absent hum of the refrigerator. Something in the ground under us, no, in the air just above the grass, felt like it had exhaled and then held its breath. There was no tremor. No notch in the noise of the city. The stone didn't jerk or grind, it just wasn't where it had been. If you've ever watched the second hand of a clock cross over the 12 and for a split second your brain believes it paused. Chronostasis, someone told me later. You know the sensation. You think there must be a gap in your perception. You think you blinked. But this wasn't blink trick. We had been staring right at it, trying not to blink. One moment the top edge of the stone was in line with a darker blade of grass. The next, that edge had cleared the blade and touched the faint white oval of a dropped petal. It had moved, not fast or slow. It had moved with no visible movement at all. Lena said a small word that wasn't a prayer or a curse. I swallowed and found the kind of laugh that means I'm out of other options. "Okay," I said. "We saw it." "We didn't see it," she said. She meant we hadn't observed force or mechanism. We had only witnessed the before and the after. The distance between those points was the part I can't explain and don't expect to. We sat another hour and saw nothing else. At 4, the sky took on that German pre-dawn gray that looks like the world is inside a closed fist. We walked home in it without speaking. The next morning at 5, I did my rounds like always. The stone was a half step further east. The little wooden cross the parents had pushed into the soil now leaned as if someone had knocked it. No, that's the old instinct talking. It leaned because the ground under it wasn't exactly where it had been. I told Kraus we stayed up to watch. He closed his eyes briefly like the inside of his eyelids had words written on them he didn't want me to see. Then he said, "And?" "It moved," I said. "We didn't see it move." "But it moved," he nodded once. "We'll reset it tomorrow," he said. And I could tell he was saying it to give me the comfort of an action, not because he believed it would do a thing. We didn't reset it tomorrow. The parents came in and I didn't want them to see strangers with pry bars and straps around their son's name. Then the stonecutter called to say he couldn't come until Friday. Then Friday rained so hard the gravel paths ate shoe heels. When the sun came back, the stone was further east than I'd ever seen it. So much so that leaving it felt like neglect and moving it felt like interference. We did it anyway. Resetting a headstone is careful work. You don't just shove and hope. We used 2 metal bars to lift, tiny wedges to brace, a belt to steady the top so it didn't tilt and crack. The bed beneath was intact. The gravel layer was properly compacted. The mortar had hardened exactly as you'd expect. We cleaned the contact surfaces, reapplied a tidy bead, set the stone straight, and pressed. While the stonecutter held it firm, I packed soil around the base with the flat of my hand. Kraus stood with a carpenter's level and the face of a man who'd done this too many times for it to feel like news. We stepped back. It was straight. It looked like everyone else again. We told each other a lie about how the heat and the bedding and the summer and the tree roots had conspired to do something interesting, and now we had undone it. We wanted that lie to take. At the end of the day, walking out with my backpack, I turned and looked across the grass at the children's section. I saw the little windmill. I saw the toys. I saw the beech tree. I did not go closer. I went home and slept badly. October came. I was late one morning because of a canceled tram and jogged in under a sky that hadn't decided yet if it would rain. I did my rounds out of order, which meant I reached the children earlier than usual. The first thing I noticed from the path was the wooden cross. It no longer stood in front of the headstone. It stood beside it to the left, where it would have been if the stone had taken another small trip along its diagonal. I stopped walking and felt the world tilt the way it does when you miss the last step on a staircase. It was not a large distance. It was enough. The parents came that afternoon. The mother had a white Kleenex crumpled in her fist that she didn't use. The father knelt and put both hands on the grass and pressed down like he was smoothing a wrinkle. He looked at me and didn't say anything. I didn't say anything back. There are sentences that have no words and still pass between people whole. He stood and nodded. They left a blue balloon clipped to a little wire stake. That balloon bobbed in the wind and then didn't. I told myself to quit, not because of fear, because of fixation. I started seeing straight lines everywhere and checking if things were aligned. Pictures in hallways, edges of buildings, the way people stand in queue, like proof that the world stayed organized unless something interfered with it. I caught myself at parties staring at a lamp base trying to remember how to be a human having a normal conversation. I didn't quit. Money is stubborn, and so was I. Also, I had started to wonder if I was part of the reason it moved. As if my attention were hands. 2 days before November, on a morning that smelled like metal, I found something small at the old footprint of the stone. A tiny chip of granite that looked like it had been shaved from an edge. It was smooth on one side, sharp on the other, and it sat in the grass like a tooth. I picked it up and then put it back immediately. I felt stupid for how quickly I dropped it, like it had burned me. Later, when I came past with the trash bag, it wasn't there. I asked the office if the family had requested an exhumation for reinterment somewhere else. They had not. I asked Lena if she wanted another watch night. She said yes and then no. She said she still had the feeling in her chest from the last time, like a held breath she hadn't exhaled. The last time I spoke to Kraus about it, he was sitting on the bench outside the shed with his cap in his hands. He didn't put it back on when I walked up. He looked at me and said, "People sometimes come here to straighten what the world made crooked. They think that's their work. Sometimes it is. Sometimes their work is to let things be crooked and still call it a good day." He didn't mean the stone only. He never does. Winter was ordinary in the way Munich winters are, more gray than white, more wet than crisp. The stone kept to its calendar. Each time the moon thinned and opened again, it inched. By January, if you stood at the right spot on the path and lined your body with the row, you could see the difference without effort. A passerby could see it. Some did. None said anything to us. They looked away in the particular way people look away from something they understand. There's no use in naming.
I moved in February.
Not because of the stone. My roommate took a job in Augsburg, and our lease was up. And the friend with the spare room lived 3 S-Bahn stops away from the cemetery in the opposite direction of school. I told the office I couldn't make the mornings work with my new schedule. Lena took more hours. Kraus shook my hand like he always did, and told me to call if I needed someone to vouch that I wake up. We didn't talk about the thing we didn't talk about. I still cut through that park sometimes when I'm on that side of the city. I pretend it's faster. I don't always go into the children's section. When I do, I keep my hands in my pockets. Dogs tug their owners along the path. Someone ties a ribbon to a lantern handle. People say the silent sentences. The beech tree is still there, and the stone is where it always is, which is to say where it now is, which is to say not where it was. 2 weeks ago, this is the part I almost didn't include because it's the part that makes people roll their eyes or ask follow-up questions I can't answer. I saw something new. I'd walked in on a Sunday afternoon because the air had that bright blue clarity you get after a cold snap. There were people everywhere, so I felt safe to allow myself the detour. The stone had moved the way it does. The wooden cross had been moved again by a hand that loved a boy. The blue balloon had long ago been removed. The wire was still there, and sitting on the base of the stone neatly as if placed was a little plastic toy digger. It wasn't weathered the way anything left outside gets weathered for long. It looked clean, like new. I knelt and read the small sticker on the bottom. It had a store's name on it and a string of numbers with a date stamp from that same week. I didn't see the parents anywhere. I didn't see a kid who'd set it down randomly. I put the digger back exactly where I found it and stood. Behind me, the church bell did its bored, slightly off chime. I turned at the sound out of habit, even though I knew what time it was. When I turned back, the digger had tipped forward the slightest bit, its little plastic bucket now resting against the granite like it had been pulled that way by a child's hand that wasn't there. I know how that sounds. I am not asking you to believe anything you don't want to. I'm telling you what I saw. I don't work at the cemetery anymore. I don't have to be there each month to know the stone continues along its path. There are enough photos online of that section, posted by families who come to visit, that if you pay attention to edges and lines the way I've trained my attention to, you can track the drift. Each month, a few centimeters to the east, a touch south, a neat diagonal to the tree. The soil remains smooth. The grass does what grass does, grows and gets cut and grows again. The stone does what the stone does, moves like a decision you make inside yourself and never speak aloud. People who hear the story try to give me reasons. Groundwater currents, bad foundation, mower vibration, teenagers with nothing else to do. The truth is boring and not boring at once. None of those reasons fit exactly right. They fill in some edges and leave a hole in the middle. I've thought about the direction. East. If you stand at the foot of that stone and look along its drift line, the beech tree frames a gap in the hedge. Through that gap, if you keep walking, you eventually reach a nearby playground. There's a blue slide there shaped like a whale. Kids run in small circles. They argue in German and Bavarian and sometimes Turkish and sometimes in that language of running and falling and pointing that belongs to small children everywhere. I don't have anything smart to say about that. I only know what my feet do when I stand at that grave and face east. They want to close the distance. If you go, don't touch it. Don't push it back even if you think you could, because maybe you could for a day, and then you'd spend the rest of the month waiting to see if it forgives you for making it start again. Leave a toy if you want. Leave a blue balloon. Leave nothing. But if you stand there long enough and keep your eyes open the way you do when you've promised yourself not to blink, you might feel it. That held breath in the air just above the grass. That moment when everything should be still and somehow isn't. You won't see it move. You will see where it has moved to. I don't think it's a haunting. I think it's something simpler and worse. There are forces in us that find their line and follow it inch by inch, with no attention to whether anyone else thinks that line makes sense. We call that grief when it happens in the living. We call it something else when it happens in stone. Either way, each month it shifts a few centimeters east, as if being pulled by a hand you can't see toward a place you can't name. The ground doesn't argue. The ground gives a little and then pretends it never did. And if you're there when it happens, which you won't be because you can't be, you'll think for a full second that the world paused. It didn't. It never does. It just moved without showing you how.